get into the actual body of the retreat. So,
I don't quite understand.
call for order. I think we know that we're all present, but
Okay. Commissioner Walpole,
Present.
Commissioner Suma,
Present.
Commissioner Guardias,
Present.
Commissioner Lowing,
present.
Commissioner Monk,
Present.
Commissioner Olczyk, and Commissioner Riggs. All 7 are present.
Okay, well, welcome Commissioner Riggs. Thank you. And then oral communication is public can speak on any item not on the agenda. There's one speaker in that regard, which is Mary Ann Hinden. So you can stand and yes, question?
The first open agenda item, I thought I put my,
This is for oral communications on things outside of the agenda.
right, I had a Ross Road topic. I thought that was in the outside of the agenda portion of the meeting.
Yes.
It is, so you should have a speaker card for that.
I put one in this box right here, which you must have. There was like 3 cards in there.
Yep, I have
Fitzmaurice?
Tom Fitzmaurice?
Yeah.
Okay, you listed agenda item 1, so.
Yeah, I realized that, I was confused by the
All right,
nomenclature.
you'll be next then. And we'll do 3 to 5 minutes. Mary Ann?
Okay. I'm here because I'm not really happy with the improvements that have been made to Ross Road. I live at Murray Way, which ties into Richardson Court, which feeds onto Ross Road. And Ross Road was my preferred method of using my car to get to either East Meadow or to Colorado Ave. And I find that since the improvements, it's really an unpleasant drive. It just seems like there's so many obstacles in the street. And I also feel that it makes it very unsafe for bikers, particularly older bikers such as myself, because it merges bike traffic and car traffic into one narrow lane that's constrained by curbs on both sides. So, I feel very unsafe having to continually look over my shoulder for car traffic. It throws me off balance. I just think that the expense of the project, $8.5 million, seems like way more than ever should have been budgeted for such a project. I think it's overkill. I think a couple of speed tables, such as exist on Lewis Road, would have been much more appropriate. And also, as a biker, I dislike the slots that are in the asphalt because it makes it very difficult to, target your bike to either hit the slot or miss the slot. So, all in all, I just think it was really a misconceived project, and I wish that more outreach had been done, not just to people who live on Ross Road, but the surrounding area, because a lot of us don't live on Ross Road, but we use it to get from one place to another.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And then Tom Fitzmaurice?
I made 3 copies. Got maybe the chair.
We can share.
You said hello, so I'll give one to you. There's a little map on the back. So I'm just going to read to keep this efficient. So this is to the Planning Commission. I copied this to Chris Correro, who I worked with as the traffic project manager for Ross Road. You probably know Chris. My name is Tom Fitzmaurice, and I've owned my house on Ross Road just north of East Meadow on Ross since 1991. I wholeheartedly support the traffic calming measures put into place and urge the Commission to be steadfast in executing the plan. Residents of the area who do not live on Ross may be frustrated by the inconvenience of slowing down. They may claim that a shared lanes calming strategy is dangerous for bicyclists. It is dangerous to the degree that drivers continue to flaunt the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. Also, residents who do not live on Ross do not suffer from the effects of both the volume and the speed of cars traveling on Ross. Many vehicles travel at speeds of 30 to 40 miles per hour. It has become unsafe for families and bicyclists. It's unsafe to even pull out of a driveway during morning and afternoon hours. I have a 22-month-old grandson with us now. He's his father, my son-in-law, and he's at risk. I challenge the attitude of any driver who feels that they have the right to drive any speed they choose to. I triage drivers on Ross into 3 categories. 1, the calm, safe drivers who typically drive within the posted 25-mile-an-hour limit. 2, the in-a-hurry drivers who rush around perhaps to the wire to home after a long commute. They typically drive 30 to 35 miles an hour. 3, the I drive as fast as I choose to, bad attitude drivers. They typically drive over 35 miles an hour. For the calm drivers, the Ross Road changes are not needed. For the in-a-hurry drivers, the changes remind that second group to calm down and is working. But the bad attitude group continues to drive as aggressively as the new engineering allows them to. They still speed. Therefore, I request certain change orders. I request 3 change orders to the Phase 1 project to help accomplish its objective to make Ross a safe shared roadway. Number 1, add an additional speed cushion to be placed north of East Meadow, midway to the first speed cushion, which is located between Christine and Talisman, and there's a map on the back. This is needed because many drivers continue to speed up Ross and only slow down minimally when reaching that first speed cushion located over 400 feet north of East Meadow. Note that the planned traffic circle in East Meadow will make that intersection safer, but will be unlikely to reduce the speed of cars after they exit it. In fact, some of us think there'll be a slingshot effect. Number 2, modify the first Ross Road speed cushion north of East Meadow by adding narrowed curbs and double yellow striping in the same manner as the other speed cushions. This cushion, by the way, was added after I worked with Chris a year ago as a neighborhood community input and pointed out that there was nothing along that whole stretch. So it actually was engineered in, but really another one is needed. Modify all speed cushions on Ross to discourage drivers from driving down the middle of the street over the cushion in order to avoid slowing down. Hopefully you've seen the plans. It's a split model with, it's kind of a triple speed cushion, so you can bifurcate over the top of it. And add a permanent speed bump sign in the middle or large effect raise buttons to discourage that behavior. Thank you, and I request a formal response to my requests.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, those are the only 2 on oral communications. Are there any agenda changes, additions, or deletions? There are no city reports scheduled for today. So the first item on the agenda is a PTC retreat, which is a study session. And we'll go over some of the regulations of that first. However, we have one speaker who wants to address us on that. Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, I don't know the best place is to stand, but so anyway, so the PTC doesn't have an official council liaison, so I'm kind of taking that role today as a council member who sits at home and oftentimes watches the planning commission meetings and tries to rely on the planning commission minutes also to help understand what the planning commission's discussion has been and what the final action is and how it was arrived at. So anything I say today, by the way, is hopefully meant to be constructive. And anything I say today also, with one little exception, applies to the council meetings as well. So it's not like anybody's being singled out. There are basic rules of order, which in this case, Ed, the chair, is responsible for carrying out. And some things that I would see in both in reading the minutes and watching minutes is it's really good, I think, to have some discussion, but at some point motions have to be brought up. And it seems like sometimes there's a really protracted discussion without a motion ever being raised. And I think that just keeps the conversation going so much longer and not really arriving at a good deliberative process. Because at some point you do have to get down to where are we headed and put a motion on the floor. The motion then, of course, needs a second, which you all are perfectly capable of. But then the motion needs to be repeated. And that's so that there's clarity by everybody, whether it's somebody at home, whether it's for staff who's trying to record that motion. It could be the staff that repeats it, it could be the chair that repeats it, but it needs to be repeated so that it's clear what's being discussed and what's being deliberated. Also, before there's a vote, and just at that point too, before there's a vote on the motion, it's good to say, okay, just to be clear, you know, here's what we're voting on, here's the motion before the body. And that really, I think, is really helpful too in clarifying things. It's also incumbent on the chair and commissioners to abide by the light system. Having been in your seat before for a couple of years, I actually instituted the lights being used because sometimes you couldn't see hands and stuff. So it's really important for people to turn their lights on. It's incumbent on you, chair, to call on people in the order that the lights come on, and it's important for people to rely on those lights. What I see a lot of times, I see it from, I've seen it over time, is people just pipe up whenever they want to and have something to say, and it really is not productive. And I can't imagine trying to record the minutes because we get verbatim minutes. I can't imagine how it would be to record those because there isn't a name that precedes the person who's speaking. I'm addressing a lot of this to you as chair, if that's okay. So it's really important to for people to be called on, turn their lights on, and to be called on. The other thing is when someone is making a point, is to make the point, get in and get out. I find that when the same point is mentioned numerous times, it becomes, rather than deliberative, it becomes almost argumentative. And that isn't constructive or helpful either, it seems to me, in watching these meetings. The other things I would say are, and I point this either to the attorneys or the planning staff, sometimes there's a question that comes up among commissioners about whether something is on the agenda, can it be discussed, or another procedural thing. And rather than let that languish, it would be really helpful, I think, for the commissioners if the staff would, chime in and say that isn't agendized, so it can't be discussed, or no, it's close enough to agenda, it can be discussed, or whatever. So I think that would really be helpful too, to help continue the discussion or stop it where it needs to be. It seems like a lot of times these things languish. And the other thing is, not all, I know you have a professional planning experience, but most planning commissioners don't come to this body with planning experience. And I happen to have the good fortune of being a part of the SOFA 1 and SOFA 2 working groups. So I learned a lot about planning and those processes. Most people don't come to the commission with that experience. And that, I would say, puts more onus on the staff, but also in the long run would be helpful to staff. So when proposals are made and recommendations are made, in addition to the commissioners focusing on what the role of the commission is in making sure that their discussions are focused around what's provided for in your role and procedures and protocols, that it's also helpful if staff would say, here's why we made this recommendation. And I don't mean just because we went out to the public and here's what the community input was, and I'm simplifying here, but also to say, because when you're looking at planning principles, this is what's helpful. Here's what we try to arrive at in a healthy community, in a well-designed community. And I think that additional input would help mentor the commissioners and help provide a better, more thorough context for making decisions. So I think that covers, oh yeah, the other thing which I find is true, it's a frustration with council staff reports too, is when there's a recommendation from staff to also have more than one recommendation, and with the upsides and downsides, the positives and negatives of what those recommendations are. Because everything, no one solution is probably going to be ideal, and every solution, almost every solution, nothing's an absolute, but almost every solution is not perfect and without impacts and consequences. And it's really helpful to have those out there again so they can also be discussed and made transparent to the commissioners and to the public who are watching. So again, I say this as somebody who watches planning commission meetings and get frustrated quite often watching them because of the manner in which the meetings go, and also in trying to get through the minutes. It's very hard sometimes to get to why did they arrive at this recommendation? Because the conversation is not very orderly and process oriented. So I hope this is helpful. That's my intention. Thank you.
Very helpful segues into a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about very soon in this meeting, and also at the end relative to the procedures.
And pardon me, I'm not going to continue, and I'm going to go back home.
Councilmember Holman, thank you so much for sharing that insight and those requests. I think it's very valuable. In fact, I think we can all just go home at this juncture because that's pretty much, in my opinion, what the whole retreat needed to be about. But I really appreciate you coming, so we'll take everything you said to heart.
I have the advantage of being home watching on TV while you're all trying to do this in real time, so I have that advantage. So
Thank you very much. To that, should we do hands for if people want to speak? Or?
I can do it, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna, just before we get to, I mean, we're on the retreat, but the first thing I just want to say is, an official welcome to Billy. Official welcome to Billy. Generally, retreats are also an opportunity to kind of get to know people. We have suggestions from commissioners everywhere from 2 hours to 2 days for this retreat. We're obviously not doing the 2-day one, so we got something in between, so we don't have a lot of time to do that. But if we can do in a matter of seconds, we all know each other's bios and resumes and all that. Although there are a couple missing on our actual page for PTC website. But I think it would be great, starting with putting Billy on the spot, saying, how come I wanted to be on Alto Planning Commission? And each one of us can just take 30 seconds to say that, why are we here? And that'll be it for our ice-breaking and 3 lies and a frog, or whatever that game is, that are icebreaker games, because that's all we have time for. Why don't you start?
Well, it's a bit simplistic, but I just don't really know a better way to contribute to my community. So this is the second planning commission I've sat on. So my family moved here about 2 years ago. I sat on the San Luis Obispo Planning Commission for 4 years. And so I was a faculty of city and regional planning at Palo for 6 years. I'm a transportation engineer and planner by training. I have a PhD in city planning, although I like to think of myself as a generalist and more about policy law than anything. But yeah, I'm really passionate about the places I live, and I've been fascinated by places the whole time. And I'll be honest, I find that the messy process of working together to come up with these, let's say, collaborative and compromise-based solutions to be super fascinating. And I would say for staff, I never fully understood that from a technical standpoint until it actually sat on a commission and gone through the process of making the trade-offs and seeing that where I had to maybe give on some stuff that I felt like I firmly believed, but I compromised, and maybe the projects ended up a lot better as a result. So.
Okay, great. Michael, you re-upped. You had a chance to say yes or no, and here you are.
Twice, I agreed twice.
Right.
All right, well, I'll just, we've never met, I'll just give you a little background. I grew up in the Bay Area. I went to school in Atlanta, and I came back for grad school. I studied law and business, and I did, my focus was land use planning, California land use, and I worked out of a San Francisco shop to help really big sort of developments take place, like LA Live in Los Angeles I worked on, and a lot of the properties around the ballpark I worked on, and the San Francisco ballpark. And then I moved into what I call real estate investment management, which is I work for a firm now that invests in properties with the sort of idea that they'll manage them for life. It's a lot of rental property in residential space and in the commercial and retail space. And so I now sort of wear the hat of sort of a business, or I should say a sort of a landowner who caters to businesses as well as multifamily residents. And so I got involved with the PTC because there's one sort of thread that began in Atlanta that carried on, which was that I got involved in low-income housing projects in Atlanta. And in grad school, I participated in a Bank of America Low-Income Housing Challenge. I won that challenge. And then when I was at Graham Proctor, I got to do a lot of pro bono work with groups that work with RENA allotments in the Bay Area. And then when I left Goodwin, I didn't really have that opportunity. So for me, my time on planning commission has always been sort of the greatest opportunity for me to encourage potentially low-income housing development in the Bay Area, and particularly Palo. That's why I'm here.
Okay, Susan?
Welcome and Happy New Year to everyone who I haven't seen yet. My background is in law. I practiced law for a number of years, and then I transitioned to a corporate high-tech communications. I didn't say that right. Corporate communications in a high-tech environment up here. That's what brought me to the Bay Area. But I've always had a long-time interest in civic engagement and being a part of my community and being involved. And I was involved with the local elections in the last election cycle, and I found it very fascinating to be a part of that process. And so I'm here today just to give back to my community and also to just learn and provide a balanced viewpoint to the extent that I can on the issues that we're faced with.
Asher?
Thanks. Let's see, Karen asked us to be brief, so I'll try to follow what she asked us for. Tech exec, serial entrepreneur, 8 years on Palo Utilities Commission prior to the Planning Commission, board member of California College of the Arts, which is an art and architecture school in San Francisco, client for the most published residents in Palo Alto history, and just generally interested in problems around how the city develops and what the right way to balance all the competing claims are.
Great summary. Gloria?
So I've lived in Palo Alto a long time now, and I would say that professionally I worked in film production, in independent feature, low-budget film, so nothing to do with this kind of thing, but I love my community. And I came up sort of through the neighborhood way. I was on my neighborhood association, which is College Terrace, and eventually the president. I was on a little-known group for 7 years called the Development Center Customer Advisory Group, which I volunteered for as a member of another sort of neighborhood association, PAN, that I was a member of. Then I was on the CAC. I tried like 5 years ago, before many of you were here, to be on the Planning Commission. I applied 3 times and never made it. So last year, I guess, was a charm. And I'm just passionate about representing residents of the city and helping our city council make decisions. And I'm not working now, so I think it's good to volunteer. And this is something that really interests me.
Zemek?
Sounded like a
Thank
Girl
you.
Scout.
So my name is Przemek Gardias. I am a registered architect in the state of California. Pretty much I've been doing towns planning and architecture for the last 40 years. And starting in Poland, where I designed a couple of developments. Those were pretty much actually new districts. And then I also designed a couple of museums. Those were just competitions, which I didn't win. Some office buildings, and in California, biotech laboratories, animal facilities, and residential buildings, and a couple of office buildings. So this is my professional background. So I see this is pretty much as an extension of this what I have been doing professionally for the last 40 years. But I pay for my house and for food by pretty much advising corporations on transformations, acquisitions, integrations, technology, advancement. That's what I'm doing. So, thanks.
Okay. And myself, just briefly, I was in tech here and then moved over to executive recruiting and spent 7 years on the Parks Commission and thought that wasn't hard enough. So said, hey, I'm a 30-year resident here. I want to work on the hard stuff to make this city better. And so here I am. That's the short version. And you met our planning director and our assistant planning director and our assistant city attorney.
I'm Albert Gang, I'm the deputy city attorney. I've been staff for the planning commission for about a year.
All right, terrific. So objectives, just kind of going over the objectives on your sheet there. We want to talk about the 218 priorities in a sort of more discussion-like casual session. You need to visualize yourself on a beach or under a palm tree where some retreats are, or at least, sitting at a picnic table, because we're not doing that. So, and, you know, then after we look at the priorities, we want to do some preliminary planning and organizing to, you know, how we're going to execute on those. Not for all the priorities. If we decide not to get to any of that planning with respect to who's going to work on what, that's okay too, but that is the next step. This whole thing is a study session, so there's no motions made and voted on. These things can be teed up with staff and placed on agenda for future meetings. It's really hard for all of us who like to get stuff done to stay strategic and a little bit up in the sky thinking about priorities, but you know, we really want to try to do that because that's the objective, at least for the first part, half, 2/3, before we get into some of the meeting logistics. So let's stay on strategy and priority and the meeting process. We are going to look at possible procedural change in bylaws. Not every line of that, or we could do a 2-day retreat on that. But I've got some suggestions of where to start, and we'll be able to see this again because it has to come back to us, at least the bylaws do, a couple times before they can officially be changed. Targeting adjournment at 7:30, and then I thought I would just put a bullet point in here to release the pressure valve. This isn't one and done. This is not the last time until January of 19 that we get to look at this. So we want to accomplish a lot, but let's not worry if we don't get every single item done. We can even, you know, decide we're going to take another retreat in 6 months and see how we're doing if we want to do that. So just that footnote. And I also want to point out that, you know, we're highly in partnership with city staff, although appointed by council and advising council. It's a complete partnership. We lean on them for lots of work. We have to be respectful of their workload and even more respectful of their expertise. So thanks in advance for all the work that you have to do this year to give us some help and give council some help on those priorities. Any comments or questions on that first page? I do feel like we're time constrained with all the stuff that we have. So whenever we feel that way, remember this relief valve, we can come back to this at some other time. So I thought a way to start, we talk about, you know, what might we want to do differently in 18 compared to last year, you know, classic, you know, New Year's resolutions or whatever. And one thing I think we've all talked about is that we were reactive to issues that were assigned to us appropriately, because there's a lot of them that come directly from council and from staff to get, because they want our opinion, totally fine. Were we proactive enough? Were there areas that were priorities of council that we could have taken, you know, a more active role in? Or do we want to add one that is, you know, a subset of a council priority that we feel, you know, very passionate about? So that's one of the things I think we want to reflect on today and ongoing. And the answer can be no. The answer can be, hey, we're full up. But let's work the plan down at the detail level that we have in front of us. I'm sorry, work the priorities, and you'll see that coming from the staff handout shortly. Last year we had some real peaks and valleys on the agenda workload, and we all want to get that, you know, more even, staff and all of us. So we're going to work on ways of doing that, including teaming up some study sessions to have sort of as backup plans in case something falls out that we thought we were going to have. We work hard, but, you know, missing whole meetings in a month seems not productive enough. And then really important, I think, to all of us is that the bigger the issue, sort of the sooner that we would like to work on it. And there's been some situations where we didn't get it soon enough, and then we had to try to cram on it and didn't have enough time, expertise, interaction time, and so on. And it didn't go as well as it should. And I put down here this example of downtown parking. I just want to talk about that for a minute because I think this is sort of material to planning our workload for the year. You know, I went to the council meeting and saw the study session from the council, which was fantastic. And I said, we're really busy, and we should be, because there is so much meat there that has to be worked, from parking meters to inside to outside to, you know, rates and all this kind of stuff. It didn't come to us for actually a long time after that, and it came in a study session. And I think the second time it came back was also months later without any interface in the interim. And it was about 400 pages, 375 pages, and it was covering 12 or 13 items. And then we were told, you know, you have to approve this or not approve it. And there was no opposition to the things that were in there. There was opposition to rushing to judgment on passing 13 things in there. So if we could have, in my judgment, if we could have had that much earlier, maybe put a couple of ad hoc committees on it to work on pieces of that, so that they're outside of the 7 commissioners under the spotlight for 4 hours, and come back to us with a report on, we could do this, and here's 3 alternatives, we would have been in much better shape, would have given guidance to staff earlier that we thought there were some issues there, and would have not ended up, you know, recommending against staff recommendation by 7-0, because that's not our goal. Our goal is to try to, you know, help get these things accomplished. And there's a kind of sidebar there of some of the data there seem to be quite old and partial, and then there were also no numbers. So a lot of things they were asking to approve no numbers. So I'm drilling down on this because I just think it happens to be, you know, an excellent, unfortunate example of how we could all do a better job of getting out ahead of these complicated things earlier on. So that's why I put that on the table. And then, as I just alluded, at least this year, I don't know what happened previously, this past year, 100% of every issue was processed with the entire commission, so there was no committee assignments. And that meant that everybody had to process it instead of breaking it into little pieces. So I won't beat that up, but you know, I'm an advocate for that because I think it's just more productive for everybody. So let me pause there and see if there's comments on that section by commissioners, staff, whoever. So I think that means there's not any disagreement that we should look at these things then.
I have a comment, actually.
Yeah, great.
Well, a question for your staff, actually. So what is staffing like for 2018 in terms of taking on at least what you proposed? And then I'm assuming that since we're asking for suggestions or ideas about goals, about taking those potential additional work items on, is there staffing flexibility?
You want to address that when you put your timeline on the table?
Oh, I thought
Hillary and
going to that, it's on page 2.
And Jonathan?
We can, maybe just at a high level, I could just say a few words.
Sure.
You know, we are very much kind of stressed as a department to meet the demands placed upon us by our city manager, city council, and really any adds by the planning commission add to that workload. I just spent a productive few hours with the management team of the department looking at our work plan for 2018 in draft, and our big question mark was, how do we get rid of some of this stuff? We can't possibly do it all, or how do we push some of it out? And so we really, and I think you hear this from us on occasion, we do feel resource constrained, and it's through that lens, I think, that we let you know during the meetings when there's an ask that we can't accommodate. And historically, that's kind of been one of our problems with subcommittees. If they require staff support, that's just support that we don't currently have. In the past, during the earlier comp plan process, there have been a lot of subcommittees, took a lot of staff time, and we can't repeat that. We can't repeat that in the future. I'm not to say that on occasion, a subcommittee isn't a fruitful way to proceed, particularly if it's just a couple commissioners agreeing to noodle through something offline. But why don't I pause there, and we'll get back when we talk more specifics about what we think is the workload ahead for the commission in the new year.
Okay, great.
That's fine.
All right. So I want to move now to the first part of the meeting process comments that I have, and that I want you guys to comment on as much as you want, which I've called here kind of ground rules for our meetings. We have just an enormous workload of meetings ahead scheduled. We simply have to have efficient meetings and productive debates to get through all the stuff that's on the agenda, and PS not go till midnight. And right now, that's not happening. The last meeting, we went 5.5 hours, as you know, with only 5 commissioners commenting on a study session for ADUs with the second reading. And it just doesn't seem like there's any reason that that had to go that long. So we need to make some changes. One is that at the December meeting, when I took the chair, I made a couple of requests to give us more efficient meetings. I just want to stay with my text because I said one existing practice I think we can tighten up is that of a commissioner making a statement, then a rebuttal, then a rebuttal, then a rebuttal. Once there's been one rebuttal, both commissioners are on record, and all of us are pretty smart and probably get it the first time. So to me, that's just unnecessarily extending the meeting. And I actually happen to agree with Councilmember Holman's comment that, particularly when that rebuttal tends to be a debate or an argument, it's even less productive. And a related issue here we talked about before is if you're later in the batting order of when you speak, making comments on a given issue doesn't have to be even done, besides saluting your colleague who already made the comments that you were going to make. And the second thing I mentioned at that first meeting was that sidebar conversations are very distracting to the debate on an issue. So, let's not have them. Besides a quick 2-second question if you need to ask what did he say or something like that. And frankly, I didn't say then, but I'll say now, sidebar texts are just as bad. So we just have to have that sort of discipline on those 2 issues, and because right now they're not being practiced. So that's just the deal. And I want to add a couple more observations. All of our meetings except this one in the year are televised, so every viewer can hear everything that is said to whoever, and it's recorded forever. I wrote here, many viewers are citizens trying to be educated on issues, and I said some viewers are members of council. I had no idea Councilmember Holm was coming tonight. But our meeting should be civil and on topic for our public audience and out of respect for our fellow colleagues. Everything that is said here has a commission reputation, not just an individual person's reputation, with the public and with the council and with your colleagues. And one last issue for this part of the meeting. Passion for an issue is fantastic. We all have that because we're excited to be working on these issues. But making passion, turning it into a sort of personal attack is wrong. This is an intellectual debate. It's not a personal debate, or it's even a policy debate. So we want each commissioner to be recognized before speaking, yes, using the light system, and then conduct respectful debate with colleagues and in questions and comments to staff. So for this meeting, the retreat is less formal, but it is an official meeting, and I want everybody to share airtime. So we don't have lights, but I would like you to still ask to be recognized just with a hand and just call you by your first name and we can get going. So I very much welcome comments from all of you on this meeting process, sort of rules of engagement. Including staff. Yeah, Commissioner Moore?
Just for housekeeping, are we categorizing these into any amount of time, just so I can make sure that we're spending the break? It looks like you've got about 5 different sections here. Do we, just so we know how much time to spend on each of these?
No, we didn't do that.
And by design?
Yeah.
Okay. So then just on your last point, I've noticed for myself personally, I've tried to follow the process and I've lit up immediately, but then people just start speaking out of turn. So then eventually I myself will speak out of turn. So if there's a solution to that.
Right, so that's a twofold problem.
Yeah.
One is mine and one is the person that's interrupting you. So, both of those things have to change. Other comments?
I'll jump in. So I know that some of us, I've noticed that some of us over the last year have asked staff, sort of assigned staff to do things, and I haven't done that because I actually think it's not really appropriate. Even city council members are not allowed to assign staff. I believe it's something more than takes an hour a week. So I think we should be careful not to do that because we have so many big issues and staff is so busy that I am comfortable discussing council priorities, of course, and viewing our decisions through the lens of council priorities. But when it comes to assigning staff things, I don't think that's really our role. With regard to sort of the tone of our meetings, I guess I would wish they were, and I appreciate how difficult it is, I'm sure, to be chair. I would appreciate if they were a little more civil in nature. Sometimes there seem to be ad hominem sort of attacks, and even sometimes there have been sort of presumptions of other people's motivations, and I certainly would never, I hope I have never said anything that falls into those kinds of categories. I just can't, regardless of whether someone is texting me, unless it's my husband who's forgotten that I'm at a planning commission meeting, it's like, where's my dinner? Are you coming home? I'm like, no. I can't even pay, if I'm paying attention to staff and the public and my colleagues, I can't really field a lot of text at the same time. So if any of you texted me, I probably just ignored it. And I know that sometimes I tend to be sort of detail-oriented in my comments and questions, but I hope I don't take too much time that way, but I do try to just say them very dryly and succinctly and get them out there, because I also think that when it comes to sort of personal debates, it's to me it's sort of embarrassing because we are being televised, and you know, if you read the minutes, sometimes we go around and around and we don't really get to a point that seems very constructive. Sometimes our conversations seem unnecessarily circular. And then lastly, one thing that Councilmember Holman mentioned that I don't think we do very well is I think there's a lot of confusion around our motions. And I think that's because they get kind of conversational, and then it's like, what does the motion say exactly? I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think we need the motions to be stated very clearly, because unlike the council, we don't have the advantage of having a clerk write it up, and repeated very clearly by probably the chair or vice chair before we vote, because little nuances of language in a motion can make a lot of difference. So I hope that we could do that better.
Great, I really appreciate that. Others? Yeah, Asher?
Yeah, I think you're raising some really important points. Something I think we need to think about is that it's fairly inefficient process to verbally work through long lists of detailed comments, you know, commissioner by commissioner, in a meeting. And I think that this argues pretty strongly for some subcommittee processes as a way to work through some of the detail level analysis so that our full commission meetings can be conducted at a higher level. Because I think we're as commissioners, we're put in a really awkward position that the first chance we have to discuss most agendized items with any of our colleagues is at a full meeting. If we've done any prep, we may come to that meeting with a long list. I mean, I've come to meetings with pages of potential comments, and I try to edit it down to something more succinct. But I feel like we're put in this awkward bind that we may have more things to say than a meeting process really allows for. So I think it's really important for us to find a way to bridge that gap so that we can conduct our public meetings more efficiently.
Okay, thanks. Gardius or Michael from the past, or
Yeah.
from your past, Billy?
Can jump in. I guess in light of what Councilmember Holman said, I think it would be appropriate maybe to share a few strategies I use to manage meetings that you may want to try. First, I kept a pad next to the lights for the sole purpose of writing down the names I saw in the order I saw them, and once I wrote a name down, I'd click the light off. And then what I would do is I would very rigidly follow the list that I'd written down. Essentially, if the light went off, I pushed it, wrote the name down, gave people the opportunity to speak. Sometimes the same people spoke back to back, but at the conclusion of a vast majority of the meetings, almost all the names were on the list in equal numbers, so I didn't sweat that. I would also note like who on the list would make the motion, and it kind of gave me insight into the average number of comments that would need to take place before a motion could occur. I mention that because one of the things that I found particularly helpful when I was chair last year was that if I heard someone say something motionable, I'd act on it. Right away, I would sort of go direct to that commissioner and be like, wait a minute, so what are you saying? Can you put that in a motion? I would ask them, would you like to make a motion? Sometimes someone would say, you know, I'm not ready to do that. Then I would say, well, anybody else would like to make a motion? I think Commissioner Holman's comment, and I don't know that it occurred to me yet, but I think it's astute, is that without being forced to make a motion, the commissioners aren't sort of put in a position where they have to say how they feel about something, and it can prolong the debate. So I think that that would be something we should try. And then I'll sort of piggyback on to something that Asher just said. In the beginning of the year, when I was chair last year, I sort of came to agenda items with the notion that, you know, if there's something in particular about this item that someone feels is important, they'll speak to it. That process changed dramatically when we went into the review of the comp plan. Just by the very nature of the comp plan, we had to have an order. We had to deal with items one by one because it's just impossible to sort of review them as a group. One of the things I think that we could benefit from is reverting back to the more open-ended process. Getting away from the idea that we need to hear from each commissioner on each piece of the puzzle. I think sometimes having a round or two, or all of the rounds, just be a little more open-ended. One commissioner might speak to one issue as it relates to an item that has 5 facets, and another commissioner might pick up the baton somewhere else. That allows people to say the thing that's most important to them earlier, even if, because the alternative is if you parse it into, let's say, 5 items like we did with the ADU, then you might feel it's a struggle. You want to make a broader point, but you have to keep it particular to the puzzle piece we're talking about. And I think that can also lead to sort of prolonged discussion. So anyways, those are some of the items that just in hearing what people were saying tonight seemed like appropriate to share with you.
Okay, we're going to go into some of the procedures at the end, or some of the specific issues on motions will be raised. We'll revisit that yet tonight. Okay, if there are any other questions on that part for now.
I would just suggest.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I would just suggest it sounds like that a lot of people I've not experienced this yet, but if a lot of people are coming to the meeting with questions, maybe some of the, I mean, my practice has always been if I have a question before the meeting, to read the packet and email staff in advance, so I come very prepared in fully understanding the project and all the parameters that I'm dealing with. And so I would just say, assuming staff is very receptive to getting questions in advance and would also relay those questions back to the rest of the commission so that we're all well educated on what the pre-dialogue is. And so I would encourage that. I think there's no risk from getting, if you have questions that are required, getting those out in advance of the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can certainly accommodate that to a certain extent. I mean, we can't get last minute questions answered, but we are making every effort to get you the packet 1 week in advance, and if we got questions a few days before the meeting, we'll make every effort to prepare responses and get them out to the full commission.
You do get some from commissioners already, so it's not a zero practice right now, but it can be increased to your point.
But just a timing point, typically the packets are showing up on Thursday or Friday. It's unlikely that we'll have time to look at those packets in any detail before the weekend. So the questions are unlikely to appear in anyone's inbox before, noon on Monday. And now we're down to the crunch time. So there have been timing issues about that.
Well, again, I think, we'll make the commitment to you that if we get something by noon on Monday, we'll make every effort to provide responses. Sometimes we just won't be able to, but we'll give it a try. It's going to vary from item to item.
Yeah.
Understandable.
Excuse me, Susan?
Just on that note, I have observed that we have been getting the packets late in the day or sometimes on Friday. And there's going to be a time period from when the packet's ready and it's out at the printers and then it's getting delivered. There's an hour, whatever those hours are. And that might be the time that would be ideal for me personally to look at it. So is there a way that you could let us know that it's been posted electronically or that it's gone out to the printer? So at least, even though it's just a couple hours of difference, maybe we could look at it on our own. I don't know if it would be helpful to other folks or not. Just give us a heads up. I mean, I don't know how much time it takes between the time.
It's posted by Yolanda electronically before it ever hits the...
Right, so I don't know what that time, how much time
She
happens.
usually lets us know that
She
it's
does
electronically and when we'll be getting it.
So that's when,
Yeah.
Yeah. Michael?
Yeah,
Okay.
I know
they're usually around the same time.
I think I've said this to Asher. I think we talked about this last year when we were working together. It continues to be this ideal dream of mine that the pre-commission meeting for a given meeting happens 10 days before the meeting. And, I would suggest that I would agree that postponing our next meeting for 2 weeks, but hosting the pre-commission meeting anyways at its currently calendar date, if we could somehow get ahead 2 weeks in a process, I think that would so dramatically improve the way we do things.
Yeah, we've talked to Jonathan about that. Of course, the problem is if you do that on a 2-week basis, then you're starting 3 days after the last meeting. So
No, I mean, give yourself, presumably right now they're working on whatever they need to do to get to our meeting, which is going to be next week.
Yep.
Right? And on Tuesday of next week, 24 hours before your meeting, you're going to meet with them. And there's nothing that you could really do during that meeting to change the work product that staff has brought. If that meeting took place yesterday, you could have. And so, as the leadership of the commission, I really think that if we could somehow, if we canceled our next meeting, but you still had your pre-commission meeting, it gave people the opportunity to provide some feedback. For example, in the ADU discussion, I would have said, look, a lot of the things we talked about at our first hearing aren't in this packet. One of the comments last week was, well, we were on vacation, and so we didn't have a chance to get into a lot of them. My response would be well, then maybe we should table this item until there's more time for you to be responsive on those items so we can have a better discussion. I know this is
keep the dream.
I get it. I get that there's a lot of resistance to this suggestion. I can feel it in this room. But I'm sort of wondering.
The one thing, just to respond to you, because we've had some discussions already with Jonathan, there's two separate things there. You might still need the pre-meeting on the Tuesday just to go over the specifics of the packet and so on. But 2 to 4 weeks, getting ahead of some of these agenda items and having the commission plan with Jonathan what should come forth. If he says this date, we say we'd like it 2 weeks out, does that work with staff and council? So on a longer term view, I think we should be meeting in advance on that. But I don't think at this point, I wouldn't say that the pre-meeting is not helpful. It's just not sufficient.
It doesn't do anything to improve the packet,
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to say.
For that week, correct?
Well, just a
Well, for any,
question.
Yeah.
for really any,
No, go ahead.
because you don't get the packet,
Good, I'm gonna-
you don't get to say, wow, we're gonna have a meeting on this tomorrow night, and this information would be absolutely helpful. We're not gonna get that information, so we have to wait for a second hearing.
There's Brown Act issues. But the packet has to be available for the public by law a certain time, and I don't know, I've only been to one pre-meeting when you invited me, when the vice chair couldn't go, and it seems to me you need the advantage of having studied the packet to conduct the pre-meeting. So I don't know how staff would be able, I just don't think the timing would work as.
That's what I'm saying, it's two different functions relative to planning for the next day stuff versus
Yeah.
longer term. Asher?
So I don't think there's resistance that you feel from people. I just think it's a timing issue for staff and to meet the legal requirements for the public.
Yeah.
Okay, Asher?
Yeah, and I think we are, we're talking about a couple different things. One is about tactics for the upcoming meeting. But the second thing is, when I receive a 375-page report, I know that the work on that started 3 months ago, 6 months ago. I know that a lot of effort has gone into that.
Yep.
So I think that the fix on some of these bigger items, I'm back to committees. The fix on this is subcommittees, it's earlier engagement, because receiving a 375-page report as a semi-final work product is just not a point where much constructive input can happen. So that's really the root cause here.
Okay. Do you want to follow up?
And I had another thought about that, is that as planning commissioners, I think we have a responsibility to be involved in the council, other boards and commissions, and other public meetings to familiarize ourselves with these issues. Staff can't tell us everything. We also have a responsibility to inform and educate ourselves.
Well put. I would second that. And I would also second your other point, which is there's no resistance at all on the part of this. I just think it's two different functions. One's getting out ahead of things 3 weeks to 3 months, and the other one is sort of prepping for tomorrow's meeting in terms of the kind of mechanics of it on top of the legal aspects.
Okay, so
Okay.
in fact, I'll just suggest, I wasn't suggesting you wouldn't have the meeting the night before. You would, because you would always meet on a Tuesday. The difference is that you would get your packet 2 weeks earlier, which I don't think there's any issue with the Brown Act there. And the other thing is that the notice period that you were talking about, Commissioner Sima, is a minimum. You can actually notice people 4 weeks in advance. So I think that concern also is alleviated. The idea isn't that you couldn't also meet the Tuesday before and talk about, hey, this is how we should run the meeting tomorrow night. But you could also say, and by the way, I read the packet for 2 weeks out from now, and I don't know if this is ready to go. Some of the other concerns I have are the following deficiencies, and maybe if you can rectify that in the next week, that would be great. If not, maybe you should postpone that item. The idea is improvement. So I think
Okay.
it doesn't sound like it's going to happen, but I don't know that you couldn't do both of the things that you want to do.
Okay. If there's any other staff comment, or we can just go on to the priorities.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be careful to separate the two issues, as you said. The meeting the day before is about meeting management. It's similar to what the city council chair does, and mayor and vice mayor do the day of the council meeting. We meet with them in the morning to review the meeting coming up. And in doing so, we also review future agendas. And that's their opportunity to say, well, that's too soon, or can we swap this with that? But what we can't do is have a whole iteration where we send out a staff report, then you give us comments and we rewrite the staff report, because now we've done multiple iterations that we just, frankly, we don't have the time and the resources to do.
Okay. All right, so let's move to the, sorry.
Yes, if I can just a couple of comments. So first on the meeting cadence. So I think that there's been a struggle for the last quite some time since I've been on this commission to really follow our own bylaws. I don't recall really when we follow our bylaws, and thanks very much, Sue, for printing them out. So I recommend that everybody reads them. I don't know how to make how to suggest that we really follow them up. I think this is within your gesture. Maybe you have some other suggestions, because there were multiple meetings where bylaws were not followed.
Right.
And
We're going to talk about them in a couple hours, because
Right.
we want everybody to know them, and if there's any changes, make those changes, and then run the commission that way.
yeah, so I think this should be as a minimum. But my recommendation would be really to adopt Robert's rule for meeting management. And because that would pretty much put everybody on the same plate, and then create really strict order that we were violating for the last couple of years.
Okay, so let's get to that in a couple hours. That's when that item is coming up. So now we'll start the discussion about priorities. And obviously, to my mind, it's sort of a funnel in terms of what we work on, but it's fundamentally still what are the council priorities, and how does that parse off into the various kind of initiatives and projects in a year. And last year, the council priorities were transportation, infrastructure, healthy city, healthy community, budget and finance, and housing. They're not going to meet for about a month to do 18 priorities, but Susan and I met yesterday with the mayor for about an hour and talked about priorities, recognizing that these would be her suggestions, and she still needs to do some arm twisting with other council members. So I just briefly report on that in terms of what she personally feels the priorities are, which I put on there. And the three that she mentioned are housing, rail or grade separation, and traffic. And that's how she's itemized them, and we can each give a little bit of feedback on that in terms of some of the nuance there. And we talked about housing, and I'm not sure exactly what question I asked, but it was sort of like, what kind of housing? And the answer back was what we would all expect, which is housing of any kind, meaning we just need more housing in the city. So that's the, and she said, we need affordable, we probably need some mini units. She prioritizes senior housing quite high and wants to look at that as a separate segment for folks that want to downsize, make a move, whatever, out of their homes. And in that discussion, I said, is there any way that we can help with that in terms of helping look at, yes, all of those are likely needed, but is there a way that we can help you, prioritize, look at them? And she said, yeah, well, welcome that, by the various segments. It doesn't mean that one of them is going to get done and two of them aren't going to get done, but look at, what are the segments, what are the needs, and of course, in light of the arena data as well, which we're beholden to one extent or another. And then on rail and grade separation, that's just such a big issue for the city. Everyone's been saying it's going to be the biggest thing since putting in a expressway. So that's one. And then the third one was simply, what if anything can be done about this? Can we analyze traffic? Can we analyze who's on the road? Her anecdotal evidence or reported data, I don't know which one it was, is that 80% of the traffic in the community is not from the community, but it's just a high level concern. But by the way, I put a note down here, sorry, it wasn't in order for my notes with her. She talked a little bit about getting a tighter definition on affordable housing and making sure that we understand who's in there so we can target them correctly. BMR is obviously on the table. So that's just kind of her initial thoughts from her perspective. Did you want to add anything, Susan?
So in regards to traffic, she was really curious about where it's coming from and why and what we're doing about it. And to me, I just thought privacy versus data. So it's a big issue, and I don't know what we're doing. I'd like to see, a presentation by the TMA to know what they're doing. Just being part of this commission, we might not actually have an item agendized, but I'm out in the community, I know a lot of other commissioners are, and people ask us questions. So even though something might not come to us, it'd be nice for us to have that information. I'd love to hear from our CIO perhaps on how we're utilizing technology. I'd like to invite that. That would be, to me, something to consider that the PTC can weigh in in regards to that particular priority. I mean, she did bring up senior housing as seeming to be a little bit of a greater need than others. She's also concerned about the other communities that are responding to the housing and that we're not really doing our part. Did we want to mention about what the county might be doing? Particular site. There's certain sites that we'd like to get updates on, things like that.
It's a county project, so.
Yeah. Okay. And those are just the preliminary priorities that.
Right, and definitely
just
her view in terms of shaping priorities. I would certainly expect it to be more than these three, but now we have direct insight from the mayor on where she would like the city to go in the next year.
Was staff or neighborhood associations aware of? She did mention there was a Crescent Park traffic meeting. So there's things, and Commissioner Suma brought this to my attention that there's meetings that are occurring either facilitated by staff, which we would hope to see on an event calendar or be notified of. Obviously, other ones that are not within staff's purview, we wouldn't expect you to notify us of, but things like that, we'd like to be aware of those sorts of things so that we're in the know of what is going on with those various projects and also what the community is alluding to. So are you familiar with?
That's a meeting tomorrow night. It's a meeting of the Crescent Park neighbors. It's not a city meeting, although city staff has agreed to attend.
So what can we do to become informed of these various meetings? Because you're aware of them based on your role, but some commissioners might want to attend these as well. I don't know if that's a side issue from the
I feel a
priorities.
little awkward informing the commission about meetings that aren't ours. We didn't set out the invitation or structure the meeting. We're attending at the invitation of the Crescent Park neighbors. To the extent we plan meetings, we can try and share the information with you. We have another meeting tomorrow night about the ICLR design guidelines at Mitchell Park. And there's yet a third meeting, I think, in the council chambers about emergency response. So plenty of meetings tomorrow night. But the Crescent Park meeting is not a city meeting.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question. Which department actually is responsible for the calendar on the city website?
Yeah, I think all departments are responsible for posting their meetings, or making sure that they're posted and agendized on the calendar.
Okay, so no one department sort of aggregates or solicits from different departments? Because for instance, this meeting was not on the events calendar. And it's not really, I'm not sure if somebody who does the events calendar isn't being informed by individual departments of things going on, or who would be responsible or how to improve that. But I've heard from a lot of members of the public that things aren't on the events calendar. So there may be a way to facilitate making that a more complete thing.
Yep, Dasher.
Just a quick follow-up to Commissioner Monk's comment about data. There is a lot of data available. Some of it is available only behind paywalls. For example, zip code level trip data, source destination data is available. It's expensive. We'd need to budget tens of thousands of dollars to get anything actionable. I don't know whose job it would be to commission, to choose data sets to buy, or to, I'm not sure we have the skill sets to analyze those data sets. I've seen a lot of data that's been shared with me confidentially, from other projects, so I actually know the answers to some of these questions, but I won't tell you. But I'm just telling you it's out there. So if we want to answer these questions, we can answer these questions.
Does staff have a response?
Well, all the traffic models we use for travel forecasting include origin and destination data to some level, but there are products and services that can be purchased or used to illustrate, or to get that data and illustrate it outside of these forecasting models we use. I know that VTA recently offered to make some of that data available to some of the member jurisdictions, so our staff is looking into that to the extent that materializes into a less costly and more efficient way to obtain some of this information. We'll be jumping on it.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm a little confused about what our discussion is about right now. Are we weighing in on what our own desires and priorities are?
No, we just finished the mayor's priorities, and we're now going to move on to likely priorities that we're going to get from staff, and there were just a couple quick sidebar questions. So let's move on to that next thing, which is, as we know, we're likely to get a lot of stuff. So Jonathan and Hillary have worked up a list for us of when and where. You have a handout, or?
Yeah, I think it's included in your packet. It's the second page. It's a one-page matrix. What we've done is sort of calendared out on a quarterly basis what we see as projects that, whether they're known development projects or policy projects from our long-range planning team or from our transportation group, items that we believe will require Planning and Transportation Commission review. And we have a little more certainty in the first couple quarters that we begin to lose a little bit of some of these things may slip or go forward as we get to the later quarters, but we have a lot lined up for the next couple of months. And Hillary, I think, can speak in a moment to the housing work program. So also included in your packet is some information on, or is the City Council colleagues memo that was discussed, I believe it was November 6th. And that outlines some areas of interest. And Lily's got a report going to council for February, which is staff's response to that memo and identifies a number of sort of current and ongoing items that we want to tackle, and some ordinances and some other things that we'll talk about in a moment. A couple of those are happening pretty quickly to the commission. You've already seen a preview of the third item on the bullet for the first quarter, which is the workforce housing pilot project at the former VTA site. That's coming to you on your January 31st meeting. That'll be an ordinance and site design application. And that will set forth a sort of the outline of a workforce housing combining district to advance some of the housing considerations that have been discussed. Initially, we'll have some limited applicability to PF zones, but maybe broader applicability, which we'll talk about on the 31st. And then we have some, this year, because of some state law changes, we will be presenting, I believe that some state law changes, we'll be presenting the where we are on the housing element and our draft report that we're going to send to HCD. And we're going to get the PTC's review of that document before we go to the City Council and send it off to HCD. I think they have an April deadline for that. The annual office limit is another ordinance that's coming to the City Council or to the Planning Commission this quarter. In fact, I think I've got a draft report in my queue now to read. So,
is that actual building by quarter?
This would set an annual cap of how much office development there would be in certain parts of the city.
Right, but I mean, does it include how much has been done in the last 12 months? So that's...
Yeah, we have data on that, and we can present that.
That's right.
When we're near the cap right now. Anyways, we have some other ordinances. Some of them are generated by specific projects. We have essential, public safety building that we're proposing, and a parking garage next door, plus the downtown parking garage. These are projects in their own city projects, but some of them also have ordinances that require some policy discussion reviewed by the commission. And we anticipate for each of these quarters having a couple of updates, one related to grade separation, and the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan is something that we're actively working on now. We are going to go back to the City Council on the 12th of February, sort of laying out our plan, asking them to endorse some preliminary goals and objectives, project boundaries, timelines, things of that nature. We were looking at some parameters for work group formation for that project, which is set forth in the municipal code. And we've identified, we believe that it's appropriate to have a planning commissioner be a part of that working group. So that's going to be a recommendation that we send to the city council, so that one of the commissioners, hopefully one of the commissioners here, can be a part of that group, and in part sort of satisfy this feedback loop that the commission was talking about with these ad hocs and these kind of discussions. And we're still working out some of the timelines for all that stuff. But at a minimum, we'll be giving quarterly updates to the commission. Anyways, I'll stop there. You can see there's some different things that we get on to in the different quarters. Do you want to talk a little more about the housing workforce or the housing program, which is going to be obviously a big push for us?
Yeah, well, I have to say, if you've read the colleagues' memo, you see that the council identified a whole long list of potential work tasks and requested that staff come back with a work plan. Their expectation is on reviewing that work plan, they would refer activities to the planning commission. So we're going to council right now tentatively on February 5th for that conversation. And so after that meeting, we should have, I hope, very clear direction from the council about what they want the commission to work on first with regard to housing. And I should say, we're trying to make it clear to the council that we already have a number of things underway, like this combining district workforce housing pilot program, those two things. And one of our recommendations is to continue and complete the items that are already underway. But we hope and expect to get a pretty discreet referral from the council on February 5th for the commission to organize their work around housing in the months ahead.
Okay. And on something like grade separation, what might be our role there?
Well, the way we had originally envisioned this project, and we may modify this a little, still talking to the city manager about exactly, how to engage with this council's rail committee. But the structure of the project originally was a series of decision points about alternatives that should be considered for analysis, then a preferred alternative, and some other questions. Well, starting with the sort of problem statement and evaluation criteria, which I think the commission gave a recommendation on.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was to get a commission recommendation, a rail committee recommendation on every decision point before it goes to the council for a final decision. And so if we follow that process, as I say, you've already looked at a problem statement and evaluation criteria. The next decision point would be a small group of alternatives that warrant in-depth analysis. So up until now, all ideas are good ideas. We want everybody's input on what alternative should we look at. We're quickly getting to the moment where we have to pivot and weed down from the hundreds of alternatives that are possible. What are the handful that warrant in-depth analysis? And so that'll be probably the first issue that we bring to the commission and the rail committee, and ultimately to the council. And then we'll have a whole lot of analysis to do before our goal by the end of the year is to get to a preferred alternative, so we can start the environmental review.
Okay. Process-wise, do you want to ask questions about this first set, or do you want to get the whole viewer's point of view?
Oh, no, I had a specific question for staff. But
I have a question about one of these specific items, so however you want to sequence it.
Yeah, I'm just asking, we kind of want a whole view for the year, so we wanted to go over it, but we can take it sort of quarterly if we want. Do you have something on the first quarter? No?
Yeah, the grade separation topic. A lot of the choices are really, will ultimately be constrained by budgets. And honestly, there's some ideation that needs to take place around new revenue sources to pay for some of the options. Is that something that we will be participating in, or will this be something that's outside of scope in these quarterly updates? Because I've seen these proposals and they span anywhere from hundreds of millions to high single-digit billions, and they're all good ideas. They're all affordable if the right constructs were wrapped around them. But where does that discussion happen?
Through the chair, I will have to get back to you on that. That we have been a consultant prepare a white paper on financing options that discusses available public funds and ways that the city could supplement the available public funds with other funding sources, whether it's different local tax measures, value capture, all kinds of different ideas. So that white paper is available on our website, and I'll have to, I can send out a link, but I'll have to give some thought to a question about how the commission might interact on that issue. As I say, we're right now working with the city managers trying to figure out exactly that question. Kind of what are the steps we're going to take this year to move this ahead.
Was that?
Sure. Yeah, send us the link.
I think that I might have weigh in that might be helpful in that when the mayor mentioned these three potential, first of all, these are not official priorities, they're potential priorities because the council hasn't had its retreat. And in regards to grade separation, my recollection was that there really wouldn't be much of PTC involvement because it's really being handled through your office, through other means. So I don't know if that answers your question as well, Commissioner Walpole, but I just wanted to point that out. That didn't seem to be like an area that PTC would have much involvement in.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how the process is.
Question,
Yeah, we'll see how the process unfolds.
Back to you all on that.
We're either spending too much time or too little time on it, and I'm not sure which it is.
Exactly.
Jory?
Never get enough.
So this is kind of a related question, but does staff see the PTC having any ongoing role as the Stanford GUP is evaluated? And I do think that pertains to transportation and grade SEPs, as Stanford's growth plan is so dependent on Caltrain. And a lot of comments that have been submitted already were with regards to Stanford's contribution to those issues. So transit improvements, grade separations, possibly expanding the Marguerite. So will we be involved as the GUP goes through its county process in any way?
Well, that's an interesting question. Just so everyone's on board with where we are in the process right now, we did come to the PTC and get your input on the city's comments to the county. The county extended their comment period on the draft EIR. It now runs through February 4th or something like that. And we're going to the council on Monday for a review of a re-review of the draft comment letter, which I think incorporates all of the commission's input. I can't think of anything that you guys raised that isn't on the table. It's like a 36-page letter or something. But then after the council's review, we'll get that out to the county, and then my expectation is that the county may have follow-up questions, but in this kind of planning process, they pretty much go dark. There's not a lot of involvement until the final EIR comes out at the end of the day, and then we'll have to gear up again and get ready to do our review and provide any additional comments or input. They want to move pretty quickly. Now, I don't know if this is realistic, but they want to issue a final EIR and get to the county decision makers later this year. So in the early fall.
Yeah.
And if they do that, we'll be back at the commission for these discussions just after the summer. We'll see.
Okay. We'll move to the second quarter. I mean, those are pretty straightforward.
Were the essential buildings the ones that are the city buildings? Is that what you're referring to? I just don't know what that means.
Yeah, so this is in regard to public safety buildings.
The ones in Cal, okay.
Yeah.
So I do have a question regarding 2755 El Camino Real. How could that be envisioned as workforce housing if it's market rate? They can't, if it's market rate housing, it can't provide a special, it can't be restricted to a special class of workers. So why would it, I don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't want to get into details about it because it is coming before the commission on the
Right.
31st, and we've not agendized that as a specific discussion point, but we'll lay that out in the staff report and explain how they're attempting to address that. I think there's going to be some, there is no definition of workforce housing, and so people use that term a lot, and I think it's going to be part of the commission and council's, deliberative process to find out what that means in this context.
Okay.
All right. Second. Sorry? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just, I'm fine with the rest of this whole year, but I actually think there are three items that staff might want to consider in the process of a number of these things, which are I think the housing of any kind statement is dangerous. There's some suggestions coming out of literature right now that multifamily housing becomes pretty hard to produce family housing in the multifamily footprint and devoid of policy. We don't want to end up as a city with all single-family micro units or single-bedroom micro units. And so I think that being pro-housing is fine. I think that's something to anticipate in the housing planning realm. We're seeing that in certain megacities around the world. And then I don't know, from the traffic operations standpoint, I think it might be worth starting to consider implications of ghost trips, particularly with PAP&TCs. We heard a lot about that at Transportation Research Board this year, particularly with advent of autonomous vehicles coming online in 3 or 4, we're saying 3 or 4 years at this point. We also might want to start doing some financial impact modeling on that scenario. Definitely will impact parking revenue for sure. We'd already been starting to do some of that modeling in San Luis Obispo before I left there a couple of years ago. But just seeing garage revenue as well as on-street. There's no on-street pricing here in most places, but that's actually a pretty thing to anticipate. And then we're seeing office format change, and I don't think zoning is actually changing fast enough to anticipate the difference in different types of office. So I think that might be worth considering as we're starting to think about, clearly the office cap, based on what you said, based on what I've read, is not an issue, but offices taking new formats, particularly with the WeWorks type situations, so just might want to anticipate that eventuality.
What's your comment on T1 stuff?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing up those different considerations for staff to look at. And it reminds me of one other thing that the mayor had mentioned to us, and she used the word creative solutions. And so I think this falls in that bucket. So I guess the message from the mayor to staff is, if they're ready to receive it. The mayor had a pretty clear message to staff, and that was to utilize more creativity in your solutions to some of these issues. And so I commend Commissioner Riggs for some of these new ideas for you to perhaps incorporate into reports to us and or to the council. At least that was my understanding of her use of that word creative.
Well, this is all part of what's going forward in housing. So.
Well, this is going to the priorities and.
I would just say my perspective is not to rock your boat from a.
No, not just for housing, for all solutions.
But I just know that if we don't start planning for these other scenarios, then we'll be behind when they actually do materialize much faster than policy, our policy scenarios do. So why I bring it up. We appreciate it.
But in regards to the traffic that Commissioner Walford, I mean, with, she meant creativity in general, I believe, for all priorities.
Okay, so what we're trying to get through here is to see if there's any other comments on the other quarters in terms of what's here, and then the next thing we're gonna do is say, what, if anything, do we want to add? Okay? Yes, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to share, there's two things happening in the second quarter of this year that I think are really important. The first is the Commissioners Academy. I would suggest that for anybody that hasn't been, they should consider attending. The city will pay for it. It's in Monterey on April 4th through April 6th. The other one, which I would suggest is potentially more relevant, is a one-day event. It's happening on March 23rd. I'll email you all about it. It's called Housing the Bay. Sessions include developing housing for the missing middle, can impact fees, and housing live in harmony, breaking through the housing deadlock. I know that I have probably the most intimate knowledge with sort of multifamily housing development on this commission, but let me just say this. I would refund your money if you felt like this wasn't incredibly helpful.
Yeah, send the memo to Yolanda and send.
I will, I'm sort of more than happy to do that because I think that I can't be sort of successful advocating for some of the changes that I think need to be made on my own. And I think that to the extent that all of us can get a little more educated together, I mean, this is a really incredible workshop. Housing the Bay, it's from 8 to 5 on the 23rd. It's going to be at Hotel Nico, which is in San Francisco.
Okay.
And I think that it sort of falls into everything we're doing in every quarter. That's my only really add in this section of the virtual.
On the whole list?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I think one of the things that, the reason why I'm not really jumping in to suggest changes is because we're going to see what the council formally decides next week.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, again, the goal here is just to see what we think is probably coming, and then more will come, and to see if there's anything that we want to add to it or stand by. That's all we're doing. Commissioner Gardner, you had a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to Q1. I find essential that members of these commissions are embedded throughout major projects, and great separation obviously is one of them. And I think that as much as I always appreciate Jonathan's updates, these are very to point and timely. I thought that having somebody from the commission in the early stages and throughout all the projects would be essential, because it would be also a communication point between us and the forum where the discussions take place. So I don't know what's the reason that the commission would not be part of the great separation. I think it should be. I know that some of us, like Sue or Doria, are coming to those meetings. I saw them at one of them, but I think that there should be always one official liaison from this team attending those meetings.
Okay, then, go ahead.
Question, what's the role of the PTC in regards to the RPP program? And if there is oversight, is that going to be coming back to us at some point this year to see what's going on with it?
Oh, good question. We have a couple RPP items heading to council briefly, in the next few weeks. One is because of the end of the pilot in Evergreen Park. One is because of an immediate issue in Southgate, and then the pilot, or the year after the pilot, is ending downtown. So we have a number of things teed up for the council. We had not, at this point, identified a need to come to the commission on that issue, but we can talk about that with the chair and see if there's some aspect of this program
Okay.
that needs a review.
People are already starting to add stuff, so is there anything that?
Well, isn't that what you're asking for, is for
No,
input?
I'm asking if there's any comments on what's already here.
Oh, I misunderstood, I
Yeah,
apologize,
and
I
then-
thought you were asking.
And then we want to see if there's stuff that should be added.
That's what I thought, I was responding to that second part of that statement, so I thought,
So everybody's okay with what's here, now we just want to talk about ads, is that, that's fine, that's great, okay, great.
Well, do you want to take on process questions now about this, or do you want to focus on projects? Because I wanted to follow up with something Commissioner Riggs just said.
You mean in terms of how we work these things?
Yeah.
I'd rather just do, get the whole list of priorities first and then
Okay,
come
well
back
then
to-
let's come back to that. I'll
Yeah. Yeah,
pick that up later.
So I put on just to get the discussion started, I put a few things on the bottom of page 2. A couple of these, at least one has been added in the exchange here by Jonathan, which is the grade separation. I don't see TDM on here in terms of, did I get it? Oh, that's why. I'm saying on here, I don't see TDM. Right, so it seems like, since transportation is so critical and, trying to find efficient ways, that there'd be some time that we would have some work in some way that gives us an update on what's happening, what's gonna happen next. If this is more like a 2019 project, that's all right, but, giving us a view of what that looks like going forward. And then, in addressing the mayor's question about traffic, one place that we might be able to actually make some differences is looking at traffic excursions through neighborhoods. I don't think we're gonna be able to keep people from driving to our town for all the reasons that they do, but if there's an issue there, that might be something we could take on. And then the third one I put down there was the whole big, I think it's called the corridor plan on El Camino. And it wasn't clear if that was the same thing as what you had in the fourth quarter of the safety and streetscape project concept plan.
That project is the design for a short segment of the Grand Boulevard of, our section of El Camino.
Okay.
I think Grand Boulevard is a larger concept,
So it's
they overlap.
connected, yeah. Okay.
Was that the first look that we'll get at Grand Boulevard?
Pardon me?
Is Q4 the first look that we'll get at Grand Boulevard?
Well, that's why.
Q4 is about the specific streetscape design project. If you wanted an earlier sort of presentation on the
Yeah.
Grand Boulevard as a
Yeah.
concept and a program in the region, that would be an ad.
Yeah, I mean, unless you disagree, if there's some reason to say it's too early, that's fine, but I think we're already seeing it in the papers and we don't have any visibility on it at all.
Yeah, no, that's an ongoing, regional project, the Grand
Right.
Boulevard Initiative.
Right.
And they're just kicking off this design effort for this short segment. So we'll put that on the list of things that you're interested in adding.
Okay. And those were the suggestions. Again, we all have to be sensitive to our workload and staff workload. But now, floor is open for things that we think are essential on top of this workload that people would want to sort of promote, that we should add to the list as a priority for the year. Marius?
So I shared my priorities. I also included the copy of the letter to the City Council, which has a bunch of other priorities. So those are my priorities. I was hoping that everybody is going to just come up with their own priorities. That would be then assessed by staff if anything of those is doable. But pretty much, I recommend it to all of us, the laundry list of those items that I think that could be accomplished with not much of the budgetary expense. That was my perception when I was building this list. I was thinking that those would be cheap items to pretty much incorporate. So you have my recommendation.
Feedback for Guardius, because it was a laundry list. I would agree with that. Very extensive to add on top of this would be my first question.
Yeah, and I could produce more, right? But pretty much I was going from the one part of the zoning map, right? So that's pretty much when I was just hitting from the side of Mountain View. There is this general manufacturing GM district, which looks great on the map, but if you go there pretty much, that's not very much utilized. Some of the buildings are empty, there is not much of the business movement, so my recommendation was just to look at this from the zoning perspective and see how we can revitalize this district by changing the zones, by changing the elements of the zoning. So this was one of many items that I included on this list, but besides of this, there's a number of other items, and then really main criteria in the selection was just to have them as to identify those items that can be accomplished with very little expense.
Okay, any feedback for Commissioner Gardias on the list?
Just, okay.
Oh, I had, with regards to the bullet that's revamp of retail ordinance after a recent closure of College Sheriff's Market and Fresh Market, so I don't think that because those are planned communities, I don't think that's really, I think that it hasn't got to do with the general retail ordinance. It has to do with a for-profit business being considered a public benefit, and the reason I think that's the real issue is because you cannot dictate, the city can't dictate that a private business is going to remain in operation. So I don't think that has to do really with the retail ordinance. I think it has more to do with, if we want to, in hindsight, looking back at the appropriateness of that as a public benefit. So that just popped into my mind.
Yeah, I included those because I thought that it was valuable. Those are lessons learned, right? So those businesses failed because of some reason. And then pretty much we should, if there is some problem, I think that this commission should be hands-on on understanding what was the problem, what was the root of the problem.
Yeah, my issue is that it's not the retail ordinance, it's the PC benefit, so.
Yeah.
Actually, just following, I mean, I think it also shows that we have to be really careful in drafting, things like TMAs, because TMAs are also, obligations in the future. But, I mean, I think this is a great list. I think the question is, I don't think we can settle this list today. The question is, how do we construct an ongoing process where, for example, Commissioner Gardias could bring in maybe a brief presentation on the general manufacturing area in San Antonio, and just tee up a discussion and say, is this something that, as a commission, we want to take up in more detail? I mean, I don't want to go through this list in painful detail tonight. I think everything on it, or almost everything on it, is something that's relevant. And just how do we have a process where we can work these over the course of the year?
Maybe the vice chair and myself can work with staff to see where they fit in. A couple of these might be sort of backup agenda items if we happen to have a light issue. Sorry, light
Can I
agenda.
be educated then on the staff process, because these are great projects, but we're not in a comprehensive planning phase, and there's no project trigger. So I don't see what these would raise these, other than if council directed to do a specific plan and a zoning change. I don't know, from my past experience, the prerogative of commission is not to actually dictate that we would do a plan in a certain area unless there's a project trigger. So maybe I need clarification from staff if it works differently in Palo Alto that I'm not aware of, but I'm a little miffed by this discussion a little bit.
If I can
Please do.
respond.
Please
I mean,
do.
I think what we were thinking we would do today is sort of listen to everybody's ideas and end up with this big long list, and then go back to our offices and take the opportunity to see if there are linkages between any of the ideas and projects or plans that we have underway, where we can maybe build a link and justify getting it on an agenda some way. If we can't, we're going to be straight with you, and we're going to say, geez, we can't resource this, we can't figure out a way to do it, or, we would need council direction.
Yeah.
So I anticipate sort of a feedback loop to the commission once we hear all of your ideas and have a chance to assess them carefully.
Mhm.
There's nothing, if I just may, there's nothing that precludes us from proposing.
Yeah,
Right, and then pretty much we are COE, Center of Excellence, right? And I think that we have some accumulated knowledge. You heard the director, right? So if there is something that's not doable, they will tell us.
But I just will caution this because we all come up with our pet projects, but it's great to identify fantastic projects throughout the city that we can do, and if the staff can fold them into a project proposal that comes in, I just think we'll end up with a thankless workload and they'll die. we'll have no time to spend with our families, and I think it's, we'll have, there has to be a way for them, a process for you to bring them in, maybe put them on a ticket list so they can plug them in. I'm not sure that having a staff presentation all the time on an individual set of projects is the best use of limited council time, or commission time.
Yep. Okay, yeah, Michael?
Yeah, so, look, we're at a retreat, so again, this seems like the appropriate place to make this comment. This exact situation is something I struggled with a lot last year as chair. I think Councilmember Holman alluded to it, maybe not strongly enough, but this happens a lot. And where a commissioner will suggest something that is not just sort of outside the bounds of the scope or potentially outside the sort of bounds of the discussion that night. And it's an uncomfortable position to be in for another commissioner to suggest to another commissioner, hey, this is not the way we should be doing things, or this is not something that's relevant to the discussion. And I felt, I don't know, I really responded to Commissioner Holman's comments tonight about that. I can't tell you how much I think it would have helped me if, for example, our attorney Albert, when he was in the room, there were these opportunities where I would sort of turn to staff last time and I'd be like, look, can you just clarify what we're doing in this regard, whether this is even an option? And I think that in an effort to sort of be polite or potentially, I can't sort of guess to the reasons, that doesn't really happen enough. And we're operating, in addition, when I led the commission, I didn't think that we needed to have very strict sort of, when I started, who speaks first. And towards the end of the year, I thought, wow, I really should keep this tighter. But beyond that, I think this concept permeates. We sometimes are driving without a map. And when this happens in Los Altos, they don't have, for example, an attorney who attends their meetings or even staff that participates in their meetings in sort of a productive way. We have you there. I think you guys are phenomenally familiar with the way, we should be doing things, and I think it would help a lot if you could just step in and say, look, this is sort of the way this commission works. What he just reiterated is an uncomfortable position for a commissioner to be in, to sort of suggest that this is a bad idea.
I didn't say it's a bad
I'm not saying you're saying a bad idea.
They're great ideas.
I know, but I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm saying, like, we've been in this position before where a commissioner begins to ask questions about something, and it's an uncomfortable place to be in to say, to Commissioner Gardias, just in this example, look, that is not relevant to this discussion. But nobody wants to say that, and so we end up indulging this conversation, and we end up talking about, well, can we start to look into this? We've had situations in the past where, I'll just use this as it happened last week, where Commissioner Gardias took the opportunity to respond to somebody who made comments during the beginning of the meeting, public comments. I know it's not appropriate to do that. I think most people do, but no one's making the effort to and it's uncomfortable to say, look, you're not supposed to do that. And I'm suggesting that tonight, Councilmember Holman said, look, it would help them. And I'm just going to echo that in this moment right now. That it would really be helpful if we understood, if everybody understood exactly how we're supposed to process things that come before us. Because we're spending a lot of time right now talking about what we would like to discuss.
If something comes up in a meeting that's not agendized, by definition, that can't be there. And if something comes up where there's, as you use the right word, a laundry list of ideas, we can't incorporate that entirely into this. So the idea is just, are there ways to work that into stuff that's going on, or if they're individual projects, we'll have to chat about it and see if there is, and there may not be, to your point. Okay. All right, so.
I think the takeaway, because forgot your title, Alberts, but because you weren't in here just a moment ago, I think we're really hoping that you might give us more oversight at our meetings in the event we veer off track to bring us back on track. That was the bottom line that I took away from what Commissioner Altrick was saying. Thank you.
Just to finish the discussion, I do think there's a way to have a process that incorporates great ideas. But I just don't know that it's like having a presentation as a part of the meeting but I think in my mind that seems to be the role of staff. But so I maybe this is something they need to get back to us on.
Right, but I think the standard is that,
You can't initiate a specific plan, for example.
No, we
Right.
can't.
We can't, and
Right.
we talk about it all the time. It comes up all the time. Let's start a specific plan on the Fry site. It's not, we can't do that.
no, but
It's
if
uncomfortable to turn around to
Fry's,
somebody and
but
say,
if Fry's is
we
not,
have no authority to do that. It's uncomfortable to do that. And I think it would be better if we started this year off with a little bit of like a primer of the general things you can call for. Commissioner Suma suggested a minute ago that we can't give staff more than an hour's worth of work. That's actually something that I've never heard of before, but if that's the case, then theoretically, you understand my point.
I do. I'm trying to kind of say that the process that's in place is to say that there are some good ideas. We could even take something like, we don't see something on here and we would like to recommend that council consider it. We'd have to work with staff on that to see if we can get enough help, information from them to have any basis for making that recommendation to council, and they may not.
Yeah.
So I think the process in place right now is to have a discussion with staff on a number of these items to see if or where they can be worked in. I think the only thing that Gary's was saying is if we want to say, hey, we're missing something here, council, and we really think you should look at that, I think that's in our purview too, but not making them work and do staff reports on it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a reasonable process. I mean, look, we as commissioners have local knowledge the staff doesn't have, right? They don't all live here. They don't all, occupy the space the same way that we occupy and circulate through the space. So we do have local knowledge. I think a process whereby commissioners can raise possibly their pet projects to the whole commission. We could say, that's a good one, that's a bad one. We don't necessarily have to act on it, but that's a way to signal to others, possibly to staff, this is something that's worth exploring. Now, if there's, excuse me, I'm still, just came back from the CES germ cauldron, so. If there are places that are outside our legal scope and legal ability to act, then so be it. But I think we really need to take advantage of the local knowledge that we as commissioners have.
Okay? Yeah. You want to-
Maybe in response to Commissioner Altrick's comments, I can just clarify, I maybe was too subtle at the beginning here. We as staff work with the city manager. The city manager gets direction from the city council. We don't actually take direction from the city council unless the majority of them votes and the city manager says go do it. We unfortunately do not take direction from the commission, but we want to work with you as partners. And if you find an issue of particular interest, we want you to let us know. And if we can accommodate it in the course of our regular business or find a way to get city manager and council buy-in to prioritize it, we want to work with you on that. I had understood our process today, like everybody, give us your good ideas, and then we would have an opportunity to go back to our offices and think through the list, and then get back to you. And you're right, some of them, we're going to give you bad news. We're going to say, sorry, we can't resource that. But I hope that some of these things we are going to be able to resource, but we're not prepared to give you those responses today.
Yeah, and on top of that, you might say, well, I've got some bandwidth, but I can only do 4 of these small ones, and we need to come back to this group to see if there's more than, not picking on you, but more than one commissioner that wants to do that. Otherwise, that doesn't make sense for us to be recommending that to council or getting any work done. So.
This might be kind of a break.
Sorry?
You want to take a break or something?
Yeah, I was just going to say right now, we can either talk about what I've called working the plan, if we want to start getting onto some of these things in terms of how we're going to, I'll call it staffing. I think it's 6:10. We can take a dinner break now, which might be good, before we get into that piece, including, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes off, and then sit down and eat dinner. Is that okay?
Sounds like a good idea.
So recess.
Are we recessing?
I like that, 2 thumbs up.
I think we're taking a
That
break.
is feedback.
No, I think, how long?
Pardon?
How long?
Are we on break right now?
Well, we're gonna take a break and get food, but, let's stay away from the table for 10 minutes or so, and then come back and just eat at the table.
Okay, thank
So
you.
let's call it 6:20, from that clock. Did they lock it into the bathroom?
No, you can use the restroom.
And restrooms are still accessible.
I hope so.
That's an excellent question. Let's see if you said I'm tomorrow.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's this other door.
Who's the member of the public?
No, no, no.
There it goes. Okay.
Hi, Hillary.
Get the interview. Did you hear home?
So is it on demand or is it scheduled?
Well, we need to have a conversation about meeting management issues because we can't do it for you guys. The whole, stay on subject, be concise, civility, that's, way more, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I think that last meeting, I think one of the major things was we need to enforce.
No, I should share it as more on uni fixed balance rate schedule. They do come outside the city, but it's only conditioned by company corporations. So it's private network. But we're open.
We have to read 10th first January meeting.
In any case, so I just want to connect with
Almost.
the meeting here. And I heard Ed mention about.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the discussion.
Not because the commission. I mean, if you have any material that you want to send in,
It's a
just
strange-
send it.
Yeah, that's, I found it really
Just
interesting.
send it in so he knows everything goes to.
So, like,
I'm not quite sure what, I don't think we've ever seen a closing deck as distributed.
So it's funny, we don't get
process would be.
kind of.
I don't really know.
Some of us might, because
This is our retreat, it's not. Oh, yeah, it's not a regular. It's not a regular meeting, I'm not. I saw that out thing in next door, so they're also working.
Transportation Research Board. Yeah, I was assuming some staff, some transportation staff, I know all your consultants
So
were.
I thought that was building, the way we want to work with public sector. It's expensive to build infrastructure, it's like real.
But the city doesn't really.
It's basically, so the National Academy of Science has their engineering division, and so it's all transportation engineers, designers. 15,000 of them descend on DC,
Okay.
and
I see, TMA is
it's
a.
a big research presentation as well as
It's part of the
let's
city
say,
or is it?
Well, it's.
research, best
It's
practice.
quasi-private, so the city has.
What did they talk about? Intersection of technology?
Hillary, I thought that you live in Palo Alto.
Go to at this point.
I thought that you live in Palo Alto, don't you?
I have a little apartment
There's a fair
here.
amount of students.
Okay.
Two places.
Okay, so you do, right? So,
I do, it's the intersection,
Okay,
pretty much
but,
the intersection of technology.
so which one is closer to your, where do you spend more time? Here or there? There, right? There.
I spend 3 nights a week here.
Okay.
Council nights, planning commission nights.
Okay, we have to start moving some stuff to Palo Alto.
Let's go some.
Like part of this workforce building that we're gonna review should be dedicated for the planning stuff.
Okay.
I don't know. That doesn't mean to say that. I'm just trying to visually be.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe
Session opportunity.
want to bring it up.
What do you call it?
No, I am.
You are gonna have minutes.
So how should I?
There is.
Yeah, there's.
Yeah, I guess that's,
But I'm gonna go wash my hands.
No, worries.
Okay, John.
I don't know.
Private,
On demand.
So we had to help with some bailout, and it worked very, very well on a number of different ad hocs dealing with different things. Community input, right through ending up drafting the document for staff to look at from the basics. So, did you understand that, Michael?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
No, I think I understand. I just, I want to understand if that's possible.
What?
I understand what you want to do. I want to understand if they think that's possible.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll offer,
If I can,
all of
I think what I'm very cautious about and what I don't think we have resources for is a subcommittee that requires staff. You know, that where the idea is to help us write a staff report. I don't think that that's a useful, I just don't think we have the resources to support that. If there are issues where there are a couple of commissioners who want to get together offline, I think Commissioner Rosenblum and a couple commissioners got together on an issue in the last year and did a little work outside of the commission meeting. I think they checked in with staff once for an hour to explain sort of the scope of their investigation, but it wasn't any more staff support than that. It was an investigation that lasted, or maybe it was Commissioner Walpole, and it was an investigation that lasted a month or two. I thought that was very useful, and it did not rise to the level of straining our resources at all.
But,
go ahead.
yeah, I think that's one model. But I think that what we have to explore is when we're handed, I'll stick with downtown paid parking for a minute. When we're handed a 375-page report that never actually establishes the predicate for the program, that it sets up some criteria and then it shows according to the data that the criteria hasn't been met yet. It seems like it would have been helpful if some of us had sat down with the transportation staff a little bit earlier in that process and said, wait a second, you're going pretty deep into a cul-de-sac, so to speak.
Well, I apologize if that conversation went sideways. I'll tell you, we spent a long time with a technical consultant, a stakeholder group, working on the draft report. It was then presented to the city council. The city council asked us to take it to you for a specific question, which we tried to do, and apparently not very effectively. But I don't know where in the prior months we would have had an opportunity to do more with the commission because we were busy working with the stakeholders, the consultants, and the council. It could be that we're just trying to get too much through the commission. And we needed to schedule instead of one meeting and one discussion review, multiple meetings review. But that gets back to me, to the sort of the program we're trying to get through and meeting management here. We need the commission to do some things and make some recommendations in a timely fashion.
That's what I was just gonna say, is that per your earlier comment a couple of hours ago, maybe we can help with that, because we can work some things at a more detailed level. We're not trying to add to staff work. We're trying to offload it. But it ended up backfiring in this other report. And I would think that well before a staff report has even started to be written on something as complex as that parking lot was, you can just present, here's what we're thinking about, here are the kind of basic things, here are the 4 different things we're talking about. Maybe in some of those meetings, have a commissioner just listening in to see if there's any problems that might come up. And absolutely, I would estimate that at parks, 50% of the ad hoc hours were covered by a staff person, because it would be worked in ad hoc, and then I'd go back to Rob and say, hey, we're ready to meet with you and give you a recap of where we are. Great. Then we had 30 minutes, give them a recap as to where the three of us were on this particular thing. Terrific, what about this? And then we had an interactive thing, and it was done, and then it went to the commission.
I'm really sorry, I know that's your experience on the marks, but I don't think we envisioned an ad hoc committee helping us write a staff report.
No.
It's not,
Can't
I'm
research
not,
that.
Can I address?
I'm not saying write a staff report, I'm saying kind of give you feedback on all of the stuff that has to do with, the parking meters and, the policies about if it should be on university or pay for an hour or things like that. Sit in on some of the input that comes from the public when they're saying that. Possibly provide you in advance when a couple commissioners' comments on the parking study itself, which was massive. That's what
I think we learned something from that experience, and we will try not to bring you something with quite so many moving parts all at once without doing some pre-work with the commission on some selected aspects of it, or breaking it up into pieces, or doing something different. I recognize that something went wrong that evening. I wasn't there, so I don't know exactly how it unfolded, but I'd like to sort of talk about moving forward, how we can support the commission in actually getting your items done. Let's get to a recommendation. We in my recent experience, we've come to the commission with an item that's taken, instead of the one meeting we thought, it's taken two, and sometimes not even two. And we're just not getting to closure on things that we do need a recommendation or input.
That's right, that needs to change. But the only one comment, I don't mean to take all the airtime here, but I just want to make sure the clarity here is that it's not what happened that night, it's what happened over the previous 7 months, which was sort of not enough happened, so we couldn't react that night.
We had a lot going on those prior 7 months. We were working with a consultant on multiple iterations of a complicated report, 300-something pages, working with a group of stakeholders, and then presenting it to council for input.
And it wasn't your only big project you were working on either.
Yeah, we weren't sitting around for those 7 months waiting, to present it.
Who else was next? Were you next?
I believe I've been waiting. I think this is a side topic to where we left before the break, so I'll try to be really brief, and I think we still need to give you input on what we're looking to add to the chart. But the parking study is a staff report issue that I think is later on in our agenda that we should talk about staff reports and how to make those more effective. But I think the issue that Commissioner Waldvogel brought up was a good one, in that when you hear feedback from us, whether or not you can come to us 10 days before, if you're concerned that something, just because the law says you only need to give notice or give us our packets 4 days before, it doesn't mean you can wait to that deadline. I mean, you do have the option to get it to us earlier if you think it might be a meatier topic. So my issue on that particular report, or that time period, was that I had problems with that staff report, and I sent very specific questions to the author of the report, or through Jonathan. I actually called Commissioner Suma in advance. I said, hey, I'm not getting the overarching policy, or there's a disconnect in this, how it's presented. And I said, are you getting it? Is it both of us? So my feedback to you is, if you're hearing from us with a concern about, or for me is particularly, if I'm actually going to write to you to say, hey, I'm having some trouble digesting it, it's because I've done a lot of outreach. I've called as many people to find out if I'm reading it correctly or not. So the reply that I got in that instance from the staff member was he just did a cut and paste to answer my question. I read the report, so it wasn't until I pushed a little further that, and that should have been a little bit of an alert to the fact that we're going to have an issue. Am I making sense on that particular point?
I totally understand, and I get from multiple commissioners, I think we've heard that item didn't go smoothly.
It's not about it not going smoothly, and that's why I'm making my point. I think that when we reach out to you in advance to take that outreach to heart, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I understand.
Who was next? Gloria?
Well, about that specific staff report, I didn't have a problem with the staff report. I wouldn't make a decision on an item. I just didn't think any of the solutions were good.
But that's a staff report.
But I just didn't agree with the solutions. So it wasn't so much the staff report was inadequate for me. But Councilmember Holman made a comment that I think, in a general comment about staff reports, is that it would be better if they could provide options in the recommendations and pros and cons of both options. I mean, that staff report did actually do that because there were, I believe, three or four, options as recommendations. So when there's more than one solution, hearing both and hearing the pros and cons on either side, I think would be helpful.
Okay, we're actually, just to point out, we're not on agenda. We've gone to the next bullet point with the last two comments, but we're, I think, almost through that bullet point, so I'd like to stay on it and finish the staff report thing.
Okay, where are we?
We were supposed to be doing working the plan, but we're now on staff reports, which is the next item down.
Okay,
But I think we're far enough down that.
Wait.
Yeah, Jonathan?
Did we resolve the item before, which was the new priorities?
Yeah, I have things to add to this list.
Because I know we have our list, but
I thought that Guardians was the last one to make comments and then one add. If I missed that, then we'll have to go back.
I thought there was going to be like a prioritization and conversation, and it seems like we're at it.
We'll go back to that, but since we're already down this
I'll check out his
sidebar, can we finish up on staff reports? Is that what you had a question?
Yeah, look, I don't think that, I don't know that it's productive to sort of point the finger here and suggest that, I don't even know that it's, I chaired that meeting, and I think at least from my perspective, the one thing that I struggled with the most during that meeting was the sense that we were going to opine, let me say this, I don't think I'm alone, with maybe the exception of Doria. But in that meeting, I felt like Commissioner Rosenblum, myself, potentially Commissioner Monk, maybe Commissioner Lowing and Commissioner Walpole, were prepared to move one of the options. I think we were persuaded by I should say the evidence, but the findings that the consultant brought in. I think what was difficult for us in that moment was that we were going to provide direction on something that it seemed like the people who were going to be most intimately impacted by it was just like unaware or hadn't participated. You weren't at that meeting, but one of the takeaways for me was like, wow, I got this immediate impression that all these retail business owners would have liked to participate in the discussion, and it's not so much that they can't be amenable to a paid parking solution, but rather we can't sort of surprise them with this. And there was this one individual who walked 9 stores the day of and attempted to provide some input, and I'll just come back to it. I know it's repetitive, but if there had potentially been a report out there for a little longer, and I'll just continue to suggest, I think 2 weeks should not be, we just have to adjust our schedules so that we meet 2 weeks after you're ready. Then the community maybe would have had more time to respond and collect their thoughts. And so this one individual who came before us, I can't even remember what store she was from.
Bell's Books.
Bell's Books.
It was impressive how organized she was able to be in the 4 days or whatever that she felt she had. But that was the main issue. I think I would have supported every community in the peninsula is moving towards paid parking in their downtowns, and I think that the staff report actually sort of eloquently identified it. I think what the issue there was, I felt at least, that the community was going to be like surprised by this, that they didn't feel like they had enough opportunity to input.
Yeah.
And it's not because you didn't publish it, the meeting. It's not. We publish everywhere. There's a general problem. People don't really pay attention. And so
okay, you got it.
Figuring out a way for us to reach out to businesses maybe directly, saying, hey, we really want you to be a part of this meeting. If one of us, and I said this in my end of the year letter, creating a liaison to the Chamber of Commerce. Someone who our chair could email and say, hey, 2 weeks from now, we're going to be discussing this. You might want to email your community of interested people because we think this will impact them. I don't know.
All right, was there anything else on staff report?
Can I just want to make a comment. The staff report really clearly set out a criteria of 80% utilization as a threshold where there was a problem. Turned out that according to the studies, that was something that only occurred in a couple of street faces, a couple of hours a week. So the whole predicate of that presentation was undermined by the report. So I don't agree that we would have gotten to a resolution on that night. I mean, there may be a trend that points toward this. There may be other reasons to do it. But what was brought to us was we should do this because X, and it turned out X was false. And that was the fundamental problem with that staff report. Done.
Yeah, and I think the secondary problem is that there was 15 things that we were supposed to approve as opposed to look at them, grouped. So.
Chair, I'm a little lost. I thought before break that we were going to identify some items that are missing from here, and I do have comments on staff reports, so I don't know.
I'd like to finish now since we got off on this, and you brought it up. Let's just finish on staff reports and then go back to that.
All right, so one thing that the chair and I discussed was perhaps if this is getting into the details of it, to just identify to us if there's any policy considerations that you can put forth that you may be aware of, or if there's no policy, there's not a policy governing it. On that particular report, there was a policy, but you had to get to page 124 paragraph. It's very hard to find it. It wasn't apparent. So if there's a policy that you're aware of, no policy, that's helpful to know. If this is coming to us by an ordinance, by your direction, or by whatever the means that it's coming to us, we can identify that in the report. I think that'll help us. And if you could have a checklist internally on your own on, okay, is it clear, just reading this objectively, that we can get what we need from PTC, that it's clear what we're asking for. And in most cases, it's very clear and they're great reports. Okay, so this is like the worst case example on just a few things that were missing up front that I think led to some confusion on that particular report. And in addition, I can go on and on that particular report, and I agree with what everyone said actually on that report. I probably have other comments on staff reports, but perhaps I can bring those to you directly, just as suggestions. I don't know if everyone agrees.
Okay, so
let's
circle back to this. My understanding was that you had commented on RPP, and a couple other people commented, and then Gardy has commented, and I thought that was it. That's why I said this would be a good time to take a
So I can just rattle them off, and you can just note them. So on that, are we getting the downtown parking or not? I wasn't clear.
We'd like to discuss that at the Finance Committee and the City Council next.
She's going to bypass this now because we...
Well, we went to we went to you and we got your feedback, and now we haven't been to the Finance Committee, which was the direction we got from City Council, so we've teed that up next.
I guess our point is that we couldn't provide you effective feedback. It wasn't conducive to doing that. So it's not coming to us.
It's not currently calendared, but we can come back to you after council if that's.
I plan to go to that finance committee and listen to where it's gone.
Okay, and then in regards to what we heard from Ross Road, is that something that would come to us or should come to us?
Ross Road is a project that's under construction. There's not a lot of opportunity for the commission to weigh in. I think I talked to the individuals who spoke here today. One of them asked for a response, and we'll make sure that staff responds. The other one wanted to express their displeasure, and I made a commitment, as we've made to other people, that once this segment of the project is complete, we'll do a little, sort of debrief, what went wrong, what went right, and make that available to people who can provide it to us.
Okay. I've been hearing a lot about it, and folks have, so I don't know if PTC could be a good medium to have a discussion versus it going directly back to council or working on it directly with the citizens.
It would be really awkward to involve the commission in a project that's basically under construction with a construction contract underway.
Okay, and then in regards to alleviating traffic and being creative, I don't know if this is the opportunity. Is that something that we could put in here as a study session to have at some point?
I had on my list that you added a presentation on the TMA and then use of technology.
Yeah. Also, like, for example, in Sweden, they're looking at license plates and they charge you if you go over certain zones. I mean, a lot of countries do a lot of things. To
Congestion fees.
Yeah, congestion fees. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are out there that I don't know whether or not we want to do them or not.
Start checking.
Yeah. But
Would
then,
that
and then you have
be
that data
legal?
privacy issue.
Would that be illegal? Could we do a congestion fee?
I believe we could.
I,
We,
I
I
have
mean,
to look into it.
theoretically.
There are a lot
She's
of,
getting
there are a lot of restrictions in the vehicle code that preempt what cities are able to do, but
Yeah,
it's not something
The
we.
MBTCD doesn't restrict it.
I think it would be fair to say that we, the planning commission, couldn't.
Yes, that'd be very fair.
and then are
Why don't I
the,
put that on the wish list and we'll get back
Sure,
to you?
and you know, if the mayor gets traction on traffic, whatever that is, it's amoeba-like when you just say traffic. But, you know, there may be specifics there that would make some sense for us to work on.
But if the speculation, and I'll say, I don't know, speculation, that all traffic is passed through, then that is one way to, you know, gauge the impact, you know, or to get revenue from the impact of pass-through traffic. And that's, there's other cities in California that have considered that
Yeah.
scenario. But the infrastructure requirements alone make it almost cost prohibitive and still.
yeah, it's just good. So the prior year's priority was transportation. And it was really should be more traffic mitigation to make it correct if they're going to go that route. Is the marijuana ordinance going to come back to us? Does it need
Do you mind if
to?
I interrupt? It's like, I really feel like that, you mind, sorry.
No, it's
on
fine.
that, like, your idea for creative transportation solutions is fantastic, but it could be really something that is integrated in some of these reports. If there were maybe a section about exploring a what-if scenario in some of these commission reports. And it could harness consultant data or free data or paid data, I think what Commissioner Wolfinger was referring to, but I mean, I think I would really be interested to see something adventurous embedded within something that's a regular deliverable, and I think you have the young staff, some of the young talent that has the capability to take some of that on.
And the mayor would, I would imagine, completely support those sorts of
But anyway, I just,
innovative approaches.
I just kind of like seeing these integrated little thoughts within some stuff you're already doing. Sorry,
No, it's
Commissioner
fine.
Monk, I
No.
apologize for interrupting you.
No worries. I don't know if they need to come back at all, but I was just curious if we need to do any sort of follow-up on the marijuana ordinance and or the ADU ordinance or anything.
The ADU ordinance is one of your tasks in the
Second quarter just says ADU update, so I wasn't sure if that included. Okay, thank you.
All right, so now in terms of, as we're talking about priorities, I don't think we're talking about priorities of, 1 through 50. We're talking about priorities of, what needs to come to us, and I don't feel like we need to debate what is going to come to us. And we didn't really add very much as a group, right? A few things, a couple of which you're going to think about. So
I have a big long list.
Yeah, you heard individual stuff, you didn't hear group
right,
consensus on.
right. So I'm not sure that long list is something we can prioritize right now until you think it, right? So I'm not sure, I'm thinking that this part of the process might be done at this point because these are already priorities by definition. And as we said before, unless council changes priorities or sends us some other stuff, I think it's pretty clear what our job is. Does everybody agree with that for now?
I just have one thing I forgot to mention if I could.
Should we read back the list?
Pardon?
Should we read back the list?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Super quick, on the transportation and traffic, if that is something we're going to explore, the other thing. I also had the privilege of attending part of CES and the Smart Cities track, although I missed the second half of it. But I did notice that there's a huge emphasis on smart cities connectivity and a lot of scooters and e-bikes, things like that. So I just hope that our transportation department is staying with the times on looking at those solutions.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a fair request. Thank you, Asher. Could you read your list, which
Sure.
would be obviously in addition to the document that Gary's sent?
Yeah, I do not have that document in front of me, but I have it electronically. But in addition to that, I have TDM, then separately a presentation on the TMA, this use of technology and traffic, smart cities, and then kind of separately this discussion about origin and destination data and how that can be used, congestion pricing and other traffic ideas, traffic through neighborhoods, the discussion of rail financing options, next steps on the GUP, ghost trips and TNCs with financial impact modeling, types of offices, including new formats of office space, RPP programs, and that's it.
Yeah, great, thank you. Airbnb. She was you were a very thorough scribe there.
If I missed anything, please chime in at some point.
So other than those which haven't been approved, is there any work assignments that we need to deal with now, or should we wait a while?
Just one other one. That's a great list. Thank you for the read back. Did we tee up ghost houses and Airbnb occupancy, sort of non full-time occupancy as barriers to housing?
Put that on the list.
That's a good one. Thanks.
Don't mean to add to the.
Yeah, no, that's a big issue.
And there are a lot of templates already out there for Airbnb ordinances.
San Francisco has a new one.
Okay, nobody feels like there's any project that we need to work committees on now. That's fine. Sorry.
Well, I'm sorry, hold on, let me just respond.
Go ahead, Michael.
It's not that I don't think there's any project that we committees on. I think the feedback is that that's not an option. So
But that's not an option for these or for the list that we're still.
my understanding when we discussed the example of parking was that staff clearly communicated that a committee would not be particularly helpful. They don't want us to help them draft the memo. You guys had a little back and forth, but I think the conclusion was that there would be committees, and the option would be if you wanted to get together on your own and have chats about it. So I just don't want to enter a debate that I think is potentially futile. So I guess I'm putting this question back on you.
Thank you.
What is it that you would like to see?
Maybe nothing now, but in the course of the year, I would like to see some committees working issues separately and getting further down before the issue is presented, at least for the second time, maybe not the first, to the commission to take action. It's sort of as simple as that. So maybe a staff report on something that's important, and we look at it and say, this is complicated. Could a couple of commissioners look at that offline in 3 or 4 meetings in the next, and one of those would be great if Jonathan can come to.
You convinced me of the value.
All right, so
the question is will we be able to realize that? And my sense from the discussion tonight was that we won't get an opportunity to see a staff report 3 months in advance, which is why when you said, does anybody want to make any more points about committees, or do we want to see any more committees, is it particularly helpful for me to suggest, yeah, I think that's a great idea, again, if there's no, in your mind, action plan for developing a committee. So,
well, wait a second. I think you're getting a couple of things. I know you're trying to clarify, and for me, it's getting a little bit muddy. What I understood from staff was that as long as their staff time was minimal, that for a couple of commissioners to be working on something and making progress, and then reporting back to them has worked in the past a couple of years ago, and that would be okay.
So just to be clear, what are they working on?
I don't know.
Are you suggesting that the committee would develop their own report?
I don't think it's anything to do with the staff report. It has to do with kind of working the issues in a very complicated issue. Go ahead, Asher.
Yeah, I don't know what the deliverables will be yet, because we don't, but what I would recommend is that when we get the council priorities, and if they turn out to be these 3 things, housing, grade steps, and traffic, I would recommend establishing ad hocs around each of those priorities. And we can figure out, it'll be a work in progress to figure out what the deliverables are from those ad hocs.
Mm-hmm.
But those are really natural loci to build some ad hocs.
Right, so just to clarify the point, and I'd like to hear from staff on this, is that they're not saying we can't meet ad hocs with a couple of people. They're saying that they don't have the bandwidth to attend all those and don't want to. Is that right, Hillary? Okay.
Do you think we need to wait a week or 2 or 5 to determine that the ad hoc committee on housing should be developed? I don't understand. That's what I'm saying. This is, let's get to 0. I can virtually guarantee you that housing will be the #1 priority on the list.
It is.
So if it's the #1 priority, and you think it would be helpful to have an ad hoc housing committee, why don't you suggest we form one? And then, once we form one, why don't you help us identify what you think they should target? For example, should they be the first committee to engage on ADU? Should they be the first committee to engage on?
That's exactly the process. That's exactly the process.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, what are we waiting for?
I happen to agree with Asher that we should wait for the council to see, as has been directed, the work plan, and it's been directed to come back to us. Go ahead, Hillary.
Yeah, I mean, that was the point I was going to raise. With housing, we have the colleagues memo. It's going to result in the council review of the work plan and a very specific direction or referral to the PTC.
Right.
I would suggest that you wait to get that referral before you decide whether a committee is needed or whether you want to work as a committee of the whole to advance that direction.
Total agreement.
Okay, so just so I understand, because it just sounds, it's like speaking out of both sides of our mouth. The #1 issue that we believe is going to come before us, which is going to present the most complex issues of the year, we're going to wait based on our experience to determine later whether it deserves to be parsed out by a small group or we should do a committee as a whole. It sounds to me like, based on the discussion, you feel very strongly that small groups can help us. If you make the committee now, we can still design how they'll operate later. We don't need to have a second retreat or even a second meeting to determine how that process is going to work.
Well, one of the issues.
Delay.
One of the issues is that we don't know the complexity of the recommendations, and we may need.
Would that change the makeup?
Yeah.
You can't have more than 3.
Hang on. We may have 3 committees because it's so complex. One group is working on DMR, one group is working on affordable housing, one group is working on something else. It could be like that. So picking 2 people now to do an unassigned task that we're going to know about in 10 days.
Do you presume these committees are going to be voluntary?
We mean voluntary.
Do you anticipate that you're going to ask for volunteers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But, no one can be compelled to work on a committee if they don't
That's
want
why I'm asking, because the suggestion that there be 3 committees made me think that you would need every single commissioner to participate, which is why I'm wondering if...
In my experience, there's been enthusiastic ad hoc people and not too enthusiastic ad hoc people, and that's okay as long as we cover the issues.
Okay, it's up to you.
Did you? Oh, sorry.
Okay, I'm now a little bit confused as well. So we all know that housing's an issue. We do know the general issues, and we have the memo here. If staff's not asking for us to, what are you hoping that an ad hoc committee in housing, for example, just taking any of the housing issues, senior housing, whatever it might be, we know that those are 2 issues that are part of it. What do you anticipate the value would be to have a committee on, for example, BMR? For staff or you, Kenyon? I'm just curious.
I would just endorse exactly what Hillary said, following what I said, which is that we don't know yet what that recommendation is going to be from council. We just do know that it's coming back.
But
if it came back and they said, we want these 4 things, do a little bit of work, then we might say, okay, that's one thing. If this is fuzzy and, we need a lot of work, then it might be something else. I mean, we still don't know what we can do on that yet. Go ahead.
So if you sit down and actually look at some of the data, and I've actually looked at a lot of the available data on this, it turns out that the problems may be in different places than you think they are. So it's actually valuable to do a little bit of work. I mean, we may get broad direction, to look at housing in subcategory, but it may turn out that what we need to do is actually narrow this down, look at the data, make some actionable recommendations around where the real problems are, where the real problems aren't, possibly hold hearings on where the problems are and aren't. But I think that we need to figure this out. We need some place where that work can take place, and I don't think it can take place in the committee of the whole.
So what if 4 people want to be on it?
I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, basically, committees are appointed at the chair's discretion. So, be nice to Chair Lowing.
I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we're going to have this oversubscription, number 1. Number 2, let's put it this way. I completely agree with Commissioner Walfogel to the extent that will be able to work with staff. So if, I think a perfect example would be ADUs, right? This is quote unquote the big initiative to develop housing. There's nothing, aside from potentially working on a specific plan for Fry's, for example, if City Council determines that the Fry's site is a good location. I think they're already working on that, by the way. So there's an example of something that's going to come to us, it's going to be massive, and that could be something. The point is are we going to get to work with staff or not? Because it'd be hard to convince, I think, commissioners to volunteer to participate in something if the involvement is not possible because of resources and timing. And so I understood, for example, in your discussion with staff about parking, that the tools that you're suggesting we use aren't really going to work. And I am trying to understand why it's going to be different when you get to the ADU, or...
I think the ADU is an example of something that maybe after the first presentation would have really benefited from 2 people out in ad hoc.
I know. I don't think that staff agrees or is going to agree to meet with 3 people to discuss the ordinance they're drafting.
Well, we'll have to see on that, but the feedback I've gotten is that, you know, at some point this is going to be helpful for parsing the issues. So.
I hope so.
I also thought that you wanted to set the ad hoc as a way of being more proactive versus reactive, so that's why I wasn't sure.
It could be either way. It could be either way. It's definitely reactive and managing the whole process in a different way than we managed 100% of the issues last year.
Well, if we're not going to set them up today, then I guess my one suggestion would be recommend that you participate in the ad hoc directly. Because I think in order for us to achieve this vision of yours, it can only be facilitated by a person who's leading the follow-up meeting, understanding sort of to what success the ad hoc had.
Yeah, okay. Graves?
Yeah, I don't think that anything precludes us from doing any work. We know that the housing is priority. There was 3 colleagues, Nice, the Fine and Wolbach agreement, which was supported by the rest of the council. And I don't really understand why we need to have this official. It just pretty much there could be either 2 of us or 3 of us that could just start working on the memo. We don't need to have any specific committees. We always use the colleagues' memo as one of the beneficial tools. Pretty much if there is an interest in housing, then I suggest that pretty much 3 of us would gather together, or 2 of us, and pretty much would start working on this.
So I have 2 comments on that.
And I think if I just may finish one more point. I think that's a lot of work. I know that's lots of work, but I think that I know that there may be a fear of misalignment. I totally understand it, right? Because you can come in 3 months into a conclusion that's going to be totally opposite to the conclusion that City Council is going to throw at you. But I think that we have as much as of the knowledge as the City Council has, and we can propose some other solutions that could be valuable to this Commission and to the City Council.
Okay, so my 2 comments is number 1, that isn't what council said to do. Council said that they wanted a work plan to come from staff, and then it was supposed to go to council, and then it's going to come back to the commission. So they've already voted on that. I don't see any reason to do that, and I don't see any reason to study this thing in a vacuum when we could first start by reading the document that planning presents to the council, which is that their initial pass. I mean, that's the place where we can benefit from their expertise, which is far superior to most of our expertise here, and then kind of work it from that plan, from their proposals. It doesn't mean we have to agree with all of them. Some of them, council isn't going to agree with all of them. Some of them, whatever. So that's why I just think that the timing is not tonight.
And I would, with the whole respect, I would disagree with this point, right? I think that we have as much as of the expertise in planning, or maybe even greater, than the council has. And
do you disagree with the first point? That
no, with the latter. So I think that, from this perspective, they could appreciate our effort. And then there could be also some sort of freshness in the document. We're talking only about like 2 or 3 pages write-up that we can produce within the next 2 months. Study some other points that maybe this would be exactly to this, maybe we would come with the same conclusion as they would in 3 months, or the staff. But maybe not. Maybe there would be some freshness in this document that a body of 2 or 3 could produce, and it doesn't have to be official. It could be any one of us. And the same just relates to housing as well as of grade separation.
I'll just say this. Last time I said it would be.
Michael?
I'll just say this. Last time
I recognized you.
Thank you. Last time I said that it would be amazing if you accomplished this, it happened, which is this retreat. I commend you for being able to schedule it. It's taken 4 commissioners to do it, and we all failed, so you are the 5th and successful one. So I will suggest that I will be amazed if you succeed at creating a committee that gets early access to a staff report the way you just described. Because from tonight's discussion, I got the impression that that isn't the way staff intends to proceed. So I am 100% behind your vision. I think we're sort of, I'm speaking for staff, we're indirectly talking around the fact that I don't believe that your vision and their vision are on the same table. And it doesn't matter if council suggests complex or incomplex or gives you more direction. The question is, are we ever going to be able to participate in a way that improves the meetings that we have? And I am 100% behind your vision, and I hope it happens, and I will be amazed.
Okay. All right, is there any other issues on that? If not, then we're going to shift to PTC procedures and bylaws. Just a time check, we're about 20 minutes from the end of the scheduled departure. We can continue to work this if people have to leave after that time.
I'm sorry.
Just one second. Are you going back?
Yeah, I just want to raise one other point about
Okay.
working the plan, which is in addition to ad hoc committees, which is trying to get to some consensus on data. We've had some conversations about data. Commissioner Riggs mentioned some data that he's seen, which is consistent with data that I've seen. These aren't all public data. We've seen data about TNC use and what that implies for VMT and traffic congestion, car ownership. There's a lot of data out there, and it would be helpful if we had a way to share the data that we can share, or if we could point staff in the city toward data to acquire data that is shareable. If we have data that's not shareable. But I feel like a lot of our policy debates go in circles because people will come in with conjectures about the future of mobility or the future of housing or the future of parking or the future of this, that, or the other thing, which may or may not be consistent with data that those of us who are actually working in these fields have seen. And I think we would do a better job if we were all talking from the same page. I don't know how to resolve that. I just want to raise that issue.
We've got a lot of issues that are big-time issues that need some data crunching, and some of it's out there.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that the city should go off and commission studies. Maybe there are places to buy some data. I don't think any of us, maybe Commissioner Riggs is a data scientist. I'm not a data scientist. I'm a hack around at it. And so I don't really know what the right methodologies, tools are, but I just know we have a lot of discussions that could be guided by data that exists, that would be more productive, that would be healthier, that would be possibly less animated, if we could agree on facts.
Okay.
So that's just something I'd like to tee up as a working the plan issue.
Facts are so 2017.
Sorry, 16.
Sure, yep.
Yeah, so look, the most recent instance of this occurring was when I suggested that I believe that the nature of car ownership was going to dramatically change in the next 5 to 10 years, and you took particular issue with that comment and suggested that I didn't know facts, right? Or maybe not in those terms, right? And the next day I sort of attempted to demonstrate that, car ownership, I had prepared this email that I was going to send to the commission with a bunch of articles, that 2 research studies that demonstrated that licensing was down, which was so dramatic. I was going to do this whole thing, and then I didn't send it because I was worried that if I had sent it the day after that meeting, that it would somehow be considered arrogant or argumentative. But if we can agree in this place and time now that we're willing to be receptive to that sort of sharing, then I think that could help. I'm not suggesting I'm the only source. You might have sources of information. The notion that you have sources of information that you can't share is problematic, but to the extent that you have sources of information that you can share, and you feel like someone's made a critical error in a meeting, I'll just tell you, I will be very comfortable receiving that information from you as a group.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't treat it as argumentative. I would read it, because I read everything that the members of the commission send. And if it's a safe place for us to do that, I hope that that's something we can include in our practice.
You're not saying you want to find errors, you're saying you want to get out in front of it,
Right, right. You know, and like with that data, I could tell you that from census data, looking at the last 7 years, which is what's available, there are no trends in Palo Alto on reduction in vehicle ownership. It just hasn't happened. It's been rock solid steady at the same number of vehicles per household.
I wasn't suggesting to do that now. I was just saying that I think data sharing can happen amongst ourselves.
Mhm.
And if we're open to it, I would really appreciate it if we could do that. Send me what you're looking at, because if I can look at it, I can review it.
Okay.
Maybe
Fine,
we
take
do.
it.
I think this intellectual respect we're proposing is fantastic, and I'll just throw out that I think starting out with the assumption that you may be wrong is sometimes a good way to start out. And I kind of operate on the assumption that none of us are ever right these days, because they're always half wrong. Because we know nothing about, things are changing so fast. So I would just say, like, what you're looking at today could be different tomorrow, and so I just operate with the assumption that there's a lot of stuff out there, and I would kudos. That's respect and a healthy intellectual dialogue is very good.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to this, which we now have officially 15 minutes for. What I was starting to say is that we can stay on, or if people have to leave, they can leave. We can also postpone part of this to another meeting. I would suggest that we at least clear the bylaws, which is very short. And as I've gone through it a few times and went through it with Albert as well, certainly that section number 2 on officer elections is something that we can address. And if we get sort of direction on the table, this has to come back to us, A, because it's a study session, B, since there has to be multiple readings. And then if other people want to talk about other things, we can. Just kind of looking ahead to the second thing, which again we can do tonight or not. With Albert, I picked those 3 things that are listed below that: voting rules around extensions, substitute motions, and amendments. And same thing, much bigger document, but those look like the highlights that you might want to address. So if we could possibly get through both of those tonight, that'd be great. But if it gets too late and you want to bail, then just either bail, or if multiple people want to bail, then we'll say we're going to postpone it. Okay? Yeah.
Do you need someone to kick it off?
Pardon?
You want someone to kick it off?
I was just going to say that, so we want to start on bylaws, and I'm suggesting we start with the officer one, and then go from there if there are any other ones.
Time box comments.
Strongly about it.
Pardon me?
I don't feel particularly strongly about the language in the bylaws, so let's sit that out.
Well, I know, Guardius, you have, so do you want to make a comment on this one?
Well, I proposed the language that my eyes should have been in the municipal code as opposed to bylaws, and I very much said clearly at the meeting, and I'm repeating myself, that that selection of the officers should be upon installation of the appointed committee or appointed PTC members. So there should be a sequence, and then if you go back to the original laws, you would see that this sequence was clearly there. And then because of the changes in the Palo Alto Municipal Code, it was lost, and that's what pretty much caused this confusion. And those elections that were just pretty much were election of the officers by outgoing commission members.
Right.
Which I already talked about it, so I'm not going to repeat it. So I think regarding, we're going to just have it in the bylaws. My proposal is just to have the same language that I propose to be in the municipal code, that election of the officers should be upon installation of the appointed PTC members.
So what would the language be in 2.1, Albert? If we were just to take his suggestion, what would that look like?
So I guess I think that that specific suggestion is a little bit problematic from my point of view because commissioners can come onto the council, onto the commission at different points. You know, sometimes they're replacing a commissioner in the middle of a term. So I think a simpler way to go about it that's consistent with that desire is to change the August 1st date to January 1st. Right now, our code says that commissioners' terms end and new commissioners are appointed in December. So January 1st would be the first meeting following that, beginning of a new term. If we wanted some more flexibility, because you never know what's going to happen, maybe 3 commissioners are going to resign and you're going to have a whole new, you know, a raft of new commissioners, we could also have language in here saying, you know, January 1st or on an alternative date determined by a majority of the commission.
Or if 3 commissioners leave or something like that? I'm just trying to work on the language right now.
Yeah, I mean, and as you mentioned, this is something that we'll be coming back to the commission with at a later meeting because the
Can you maybe
bylaws-
just give us some proposals so that we don't have to debate like all the fine?
Can I just ask a question?
That's what we did.
You just suggested.
Yeah.
Wait, hang on, Asher had his hand up first.
What would happen if we just remove this sentence, the election shall be held at the first regular commission meeting conducted after August 1? So if we just remove that sentence, then wouldn't this by implication just become a matter of commissioner's discretion or our bylaws? I mean, because other commissions don't actually stipulate an election date for officers in the Muni Code.
Right. So, and that's what we're proposing to do for the Planning Commission and Transportation Commission as well, is, you know, take it out of the Muni Code and have it be something in the bylaws. I think it's helpful to have a date, but we don't need to have one. It could be something that where the commission decides each year the date on which to hold their election. But it's probably helpful to have a regular date in there as well.
But it still says term of 1 year.
Yeah, it still says term 1 year.
Yeah, I agree.
I think, Susan, you were second?
Well, I agree with that, Commissioner Walpole. And also, we already changed the Muni Code, that reflects that anyway.
It's my understanding that motions are not entertained, except I thought that you could amend your bylaws during the retreat.
Yes.
Is that your opinion?
No. The bylaws, an amendment to the bylaws must be submitted at a regular meeting and then not voted upon until the next regular meeting.
Okay, so I would just suggest that if somebody has a specific, I think we all understand what's going on here. We understand this situation. Do we want to have a date? Do we want to have it after a year or not? If there's people who have particular interest in this, I think we can close this discussion since there's so little time and just suggest that the people who are interested in it draft something, bring it to our next meeting. Does it have to be on the agenda?
We would agendize an amendment to bylaws and then.
So I think it's fair to assume that you should agendize something about the bylaws and that you are receptive to any commissioner's suggested amendment. If everybody suggests an amendment, great, and then we just put it on the meeting and then we vote on it at the next meeting. 'Cause I don't
Yeah,
know.
but what we can do here is do a straw vote for him to come back with the actual language we're gonna vote on.
But then we still have to come back for 2 meetings.
You have to
Yeah,
anyway.
I think he
You
should
have
come
to
back
anyway.
with, I think he
Hang on.
come back with a few options.
We have to anyway. So what'd you say, Commissioner Riggs?
Well, I think that Commissioner Alchuk's intent is to be efficient. And I think the most efficient thing to do is to table this discussion until the next meeting, which we can actually review specific proposals, make a decision, and then, or come to consensus, and then make a decision the following meeting, if I'm understanding Albert correctly.
Well, it doesn't matter, because when I talked with Albert before, as I understand it, we can make the suggestions now and even come up with the wording, which he will then draft with any other changes we make and come back with an item for us to approve the next meeting.
But we might
So it
change
doesn't
it at
matter.
that meeting
I
anyway.
know, but it's like, sometimes it's very difficult for us to build consensus, so it might as well have somebody propose an amendment and then we just take a vote. And if that fails, someone can make a second amendment.
Yeah, I'm sorry, may I have the floor again, if that's okay? My understanding from Albert, if you could correct me then, is that it's had to be agendized one meeting, and then we vote on the following meeting. Is that the way you just explained it?
Yeah, that's correct. And so I guess if I can suggest, you know, if we're having trouble coalescing on one thing right now, for the commissioners who do have something that they would like to propose, please get in touch with me, and then at the next meeting, that's something we can include in the staff report and have
I agree with your proposal.
that available to shape the discussion that.
Right, because either way, it's
There's 2.20.30
this one, when we talked in the
2.20.30
pre-meeting,
in the
we thought if we
Unicode.
can get the language now, then it's
This.
done, and he just brings back the final copy to vote. So tonight, or some other night, we have to
For
talk.
this, they just changed.
You've
it.
got
We
one
have to
proposal,
update it.
Al,
was that
you've got
changed?
one
Okay.
proposal
We voted on
from
it.
Asher. So
So,
write that down as the default, and then people can give him more input.
I would
Okay,
encourage
yeah.
you to submit your amendment. I would encourage you to submit.
Yeah,
your
I
amendment.
will. I told you, yes, yes.
I'll strike.
So does everybody understand that on this issue, we're gonna submit documents directly to Albert, no copies to the commission? Just-
Well, it gets to us.
Pardon me?
It comes to us in the staff report.
Yeah, but to begin with, they're gonna go to Albert.
Right.
Or the,
Okay. Were there any other items in bylaws that you guys wanted to check about? Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, I would suggest that I will be drafting language to submit to Albert as well. You've heard me say it before, I'd like to suggest that we place substitute motions.
That's
That's not in the
this document.
that's the
bylaws.
procedure.
That's the next document. This is just a 3-page bylaws document.
Sorry, I thought this was all.
No. So just this document, after officers, committees, quorum, regular special meetings.
I
Go ahead, Gloria.
I just have a couple comments, and one is section 6, which seems to indicate that we can't get, that we shouldn't be getting any additional items at places. Is that correct? And in general, I don't like getting items at places because people don't have time to read them during the meeting. I wanted to make that comment, and I didn't understand section 8, record of hearing. Could staff maybe just give me an example of that?
Wait, are we on 6 now or 8?
I was just making 2 comments
Okay.
about 6 and 8.
I had that same question. Is that just us approving the minutes? Is that what that means?
Okay, let's hear from council on 6.
okay, so on 6, this section is really just stating that the commission will comply with the Brown Act. I guess beyond that, what we're saying is that we're going to publish the agenda the Thursday before, which is a little bit more than 72 hours. And so, in general, we won't be adding new items for discussion after that. It's still, possible that if there's new information on something that's already published in the agenda, we might bring you an at-places update.
Okay, thank you.
And then was the other one 7
On
and 8?
8, record of hearing.
It's the videotapes.
So, I'm not sure exactly what this is referring to. I'm guessing it's basically ensuring that it's a due process protection for a property owner whose property is before the planning commission, for an quasi-judicial review. Seems like it's probably attempting to make sure if it seems like an item is controversial, that there's going to be a record available. It's part of our regular practice for all of our meetings anyway. So in some ways, yes, it's saying that we'll approve the minutes. It probably also means that, we'll keep an additional record of what occurs at that meeting, which, as I said, we already do for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no more on that, then I'd like to go to the second document and we'll see how far we get on this. And I would suggest we start with section 3.1, motions, debate, and voting. I've highlighted the 3 things here that we want to get to, but there's a few things here that are worth repeating quite quickly, and then I'll stop in a couple places and Albert will give you an opinion. So it talks about types of motion, receiving permission from the presiding officer before making a motion. It needs to be stated. A second is required. I think there's been some misunderstanding about that you want a second because you want to know at least 2 of 7 people are in favor of the motion and want to discuss it. So without a second, that goes away. Talking about restating the motion, I just commented on lack of a second. The maker makes the first, is the first commissioner recognized this week. That's a practice we've been following. And one of the things that actually spontaneously came up was, the issue of, it seems like some commissioners want a long debate to help them formulate what the right motion is, and other commissioners would like to come with a motion that focuses the discussion, which can then go off into a debate direction. I favor the latter, where we're talking about something very specific, but that can't be done without some prior discussion. So generally, a round of comments is better before a motion comes, and it seems like that's the most, let's say, efficient and fair way to manage it. But we can talk about that now and later. And the other issues then is the precedent of the motions, which there's really a batting order here, as you see, A to J. And we can fix the time at which to adjourn, we can adjourn. Technically, we should vote to take a recess, although we generally just kind of get the consensus with, eyeballs, it's a good time to take a recess, which I'm comfortable with. This raise a question of personal privilege is something I think we should talk about and use it, in my judgment. A commissioner can address the commission on the question of personal privilege. Shall be limited to cases in which the commissioner's integrity, character, or motives are questioned, or when the welfare of the commission is concerned. And just note that if the presiding officer recognizes the privilege, the motion is not, doesn't require a second, and that person can just make his comment, and then you carry on from there, is what that says. The next one is tabling a motion. I know I'm going fast, so stop me if I'm going too fast, which is, I think we're all familiar with that. Importantly, on number F, which is move the previous question, obviously this is to basically stop debate. If someone is perceiving that debate has gone too long, move the previous question means, hey guys, we're ready to vote on this. Importantly, this requires, where's that graph? 2/3 majority of the commission present, right? So in that case, it would have to get, with a full commission, it would have to be 5 people to say it's time to move the previous question. So with that constraint, it's not a blunt instrument to cut off debate. It's really 5 of 7 people say enough is enough. And that's what it says right now. Does anybody have any comments about that? Should it be easier, should it be harder?
I'm sorry for being unpolite. I think that we can read. And I appreciate your review, but we can read. And so I recommend just in giving that there's a short period of time that we just look into this. I think that pretty much you should be the enforcer of this rules. And many of those that pretty much they were not followed or they were not enforced whatsoever at a variety of our previous meetings. So here, I think this is your responsibility to make us follow.
And so the reason I'm going over this, Guardius, is because these have been published for the history of the commission, and I don't see evidence that people have read them. So I want to know that everyone's listening, just like we went over all of the elements of the comprehensive plan.
So
and that's why I'm also going fast.
Why does Palo Alto not follow Robert's rules and orders?
Nobody
knows.
Are
Are you serious? No.
I can answer that question.
It's very impractical.
I can answer that question. Well, I didn't enforce these last year because I didn't need to have what I believed was an effective meeting. I think that when the meeting starts to break down, as I think the last several have, then you've got to fall back on some sort of protocol. I think that's what's happening right now. We didn't struggle to conclude our meetings at 9:30 last year, with the exception of the comp time ones. So I think right now we're turning back towards them. People did complain that we weren't following the rules of order, but I didn't see them as a hurdle. I think potentially previous chairs also didn't consider the, I would say, lack of.
That's not the situation. You want to make it?
That's exactly the situation. It was my prerogative last year to decide to calling people when they lit lights, or to call them
It's
when...
institutionalized that we don't use Robert's Rules of Order.
I'm telling you, I've been on the commission for 6 years. We have used it. Mark Michael used the Robert's Rules of Order. Me and Commissioner Gardias were on that commission at the time. It's the chair's prerogative. I'm telling you specifically, this is why I didn't do it.
Look at page 3-1.
It's not a prerogative.
Yeah.
Just telling you why I didn't
I don't
do it.
understand what the deviation, because some of these rules are fairly circular, and they create a process that is, so I.
Okay, Jonathan, you have a address that, please.
So, yeah, I mean, we use a modified form of Robert's Rules of Orders, and I think we choose a modified form to cut out some of the arcane sort of procedural requirements of the book, the Robert's Rules book. And so what this is attempting to do is streamline the discussion so that it focuses on the key essential items of debate. In recent years, we've created this table to help clarify, sort of the precedents of how things come forward. And I think in some ways we've maybe complicated it a little bit more. I think there's a lot of extraneous information in here that we could probably trim and true up. But, I don't, so anyways, that's what we've done. It's not an elective process to use one or the other. These are the rules. And I think it's ready for amendment and change. Staff can propose some changes to this. And
So the only one that I was blasting down there, the only one I think we want to talk about is amendments, substitutions, and abstentions. So I yield the floor to Albert on those, with some suggestions. Yes, go ahead.
Before you get there, you have voting rules with abstentions on here? My understanding.
Sorry? I didn't hear what you said.
It says voting rules with abstentions on I'm assuming that just means that I know what an abstention means.
Right, that's what I
Means the
said.
same thing it means other places?
Yeah, this is one of the 3 things he's going to talk about right now, is what the process is, voting and majorities and quorums relative to the issue of abstentions.
Okay, so we had this come up recently at a commission meeting, but I think one of the areas where our rules are frankly kind of nonsensical is around what it means to abstain from the vote, or how you count votes when someone abstains. This is on page 3-6. Right now, the rules say that an abstainer chooses not to vote and in effect consents that a majority of the quorum of the commission present may act for him or her. And I've consulted with all of my colleagues in the city attorney's office. We frankly don't know what this sentence means because all of the words can't be there at the same time. So a majority of a quorum in particular doesn't work. A quorum generally by definition is a majority of the full commission. So in this case, a quorum, and it's defined in the bylaws as well, a quorum is 4. I think it's nonsensical for this to mean that the abstainer consents that 3 members of the commission will act for him or her, which is what a majority of a quorum would be. So I think what's important is that we arrive on a rule that is clear and that makes sense, so that commissioners, when they're voting, know what their vote or their abstention will mean when we're counting up the votes.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
If 4 people show up to a meeting
Yes.
and 3 vote in favor and 1 abstains, how would you interpret the vote?
Well, that's the debate now, right?
No, I want to understand based on that, because I don't know that, based on what is currently written, wouldn't that suffice as,
So in that case, the motion will pass, right? There are sufficient members, quorum is present so that the body can conduct business, and it transacts its business by a majority of members voting.
okay, so I read that, so can you go back to this? If a person abstains, I read the bylaws to suggest that there's basically accepting the decision of the majority of individuals present.
I agree with that.
And so I don't understand what, it sounded to me like there's a major flaw in your mind in this, and I'm trying to understand what it is.
So I think what you're suggesting is that this should read majority of the commissioners present.
Sorry,
and
can you,
Yeah, this is the...
yeah.
Maybe just take out the word of the quorum.
Yeah, I think what you're suggesting is that
If you take out the phrase of the quorum, would that
word
make it
of
make?
the quorum,
I don't see anything.
Why is the
super
quorum?
complicated.
Yeah, but why is the quorum the problem?
The quorum is the group that's.
Because,
Right. If 5 people are there, that's the quorum. 4 people are there, that's a quorum. You can't have 3.
You can't have a meeting.
right.
You
So
could
let's,
substitute quorum for the commissioners present as long as the commissioners meet the minimum requirement of present.
Well, we can't even meet if we don't have a minimum, if we don't.
That's
That's
my
what he's
point.
saying.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with this
That's
language.
why I'm trying to understand.
Okay.
what's the
Well,
problem.
but there are 2 voting cases. There's a majority voting case and there's a 2/3 voting case. And there's actually some confusion here about the 2/3 voting case.
Well, last time we had an issue where only 2 people, like, it was 50-50. In that case, it wasn't considered,
No, so, Mike, so this is a good point. I'm sorry so the last time when we voted, there was also 3-2 vote, right? Wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that based on your interpretation, that vote failed. But when I read it, and I just didn't remember this specific paragraph, it looks to me that it passed. Because majority that abstained, who was me, I think, was it me?
Wait, no, it was 3-1-2. You and I abstained. Is that the one you're talking about, the last
no,
one?
it's not. It's a majority. It's
You
a
weren't there.
majority of the quorum of commissioners present, not a majority of the commissioners who voted in favor. So because you abstained, it didn't go 3-2, it went 3-2-1. And 3 is not a majority of the commissioners present, it's half of the commissioners present. 50% is not a majority. It's 50
Well, it talks about majority of the quorum.
quorum
And the quorum.
present. If you are president, you're part of the quorum. If there are 6 people in the room and 3 vote in favor and 2 abstain, 2 vote against and 1 abstains, and only 3 of the 6 voted for it, which is not a majority, so it failed. It didn't fail because you didn't support it.
No, but hold on a second, but I was part of the quorum.
2 abstain and 1
Yes.
I was on the floor, and I just pretty much
Pastor
abstained
failed.
from the
Yes.
vote.
Okay.
So I was part of the
We
quorum,
needed
so,
you.
so it should be counted, including myself.
We're trying to get advice of counsel. We're trying to get advice of counsel here. Albert?
An abstention can't move the needle.
Okay, we're trying to
It's
get,
only treated.
Michael.
I know, but I'm sorry. This
But
is.
no, I'm sorry.
He's not the one lawyer.
we're trying to, yeah, but he's the one that's supposed to be giving us
He's one who
guidance on
counts.
this.
Okay.
So suggest, in the light of what you've heard, what you think the language
You
should be.
think this is right?
Michael?
No, well, hold on a second, this is important because I just want to make sure that pretty much that the vote was correct back then.
We're talking about what's going forward.
I know, but you know, it's just now I have doubts, right? We had this vote, we got instructions from Albert, right? After this discussion, I'm not sure if this what was voted back then was truly voted along this paragraph.
But that's not what we're talking about. We're trying to figure out going forward, what is the right way to interpret this, and if it needs to be changed.
No, what we're discussing right now is whether or not there is an inherent problem in the way it's written.
Yeah. And he raised the issue that he thought there was.
You know,
I'm suggesting that.
can I say something?
Yeah, you haven't talked
I
yet.
would really appreciate hearing what our attorney recommends we say and changes to make it clear, and what it would mean, because that's what counts here. So can we,
If I can just offer, I don't feel like we have to come up with language right here. I mean, everybody's tired and I mean, what we need is a sentiment of what the commission is interested in, and we can craft that language, and that's, I hope we don't try to figure out.
So let's just test that then. I think that's exactly right. So in a reductio case, if we had 7 present, 4 abstained, and we had a 2-1 vote, should that 2-1 prevail?
Say that one more time.
That's it.
So if we
No.
had 7 present,
It's not a majority of the quorum.
4 abstained, 2-1 vote.
It's not a
So
majority.
let's just walk through, and let's just decide what we think the right outcome
That's
should
all we're
be.
trying to do.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting to the way this is written.
No, but I'm saying normative.
The outcome,
What is it that we want to have happen? You
So
know?
I would support the outcome should be that the majority prevail on that scenario.
But that's the 2 prevails.
That's what my,
So,
to answer your question, that's my vote.
Raise a point of order. This is precisely the kind of problem that we have at the meetings, is when you've got 3 different types of conversations going on.
Right.
There's all this crosstalk, and this is a classic case study of what the issue is.
Not a meeting, Joe.
What does it mean?
It's a discussion.
No, he stood up the process before,
Right.
how the conversation should take place. I mean, I think it's fine, we are recording this audibly, and this crosstalk creates the challenge. I'm all right with the fluidity of the debate and the study session, but I think
it's hard to have 3 different conversations going on at once and still run an effective meeting.
Right, and 2 of you were starting to get into one of those arguments that was referred to, and then we just got a clarifying request to just decide what we want, which is what Albert and I talked about earlier and saying now. His case, for example, 2-1 with 4 abstentions, do we want that to be the law? We can write it that way. If we don't want it to be that way, we want it to be some way else, we can write it that way. That's what we're doing, looking at changes here. Yes, Doria?
It seems to me that there must be a precedent for how in how it counts if a majority abstains. There must be a precedent that's set. Like what would happen on the council if a majority abstains from voting? Does it get to pass or fail? I mean, because the real truth is, if a majority could abstain and keep the vote from passing because the remaining people the people who actually voted didn't make up a quorum of that body, it would mean that people could use abstinence to keep a vote from happening. Is that clear, what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know if you asked me a question.
Yeah, so I don't think there should be a loophole in what it means to abstain and the way you count it that would allow a group to keep a vote from happening because so many people abstained.
Is that a possibility, Albert?
I'm not sure that it would keep the vote from happening. I think one suggestion, I think that is a clear way of achieving what Michael believes the language already says and what Doria is concerned about is just to make clear, we could say that an abstention should be counted as a no vote.
How would you do the exact opposite? I would actually do the exact opposite. Because in the scenario where it's 3-2-1, then the abstention, the person who's making the abstention can't say, I sat out this vote, but I support the commission's choice, which is exactly what Guardias does. Guardias has in the past said, you know what, I will support the recommendation of this commission, but I can't stand behind this. That's what he's in essence doing. I think, look, I'm fine if we want to spend 20 minutes talking about this. I don't believe that this language, if you read it, it specifically says that an abstention can't move the needle, which is to say that an abstention can't create an action. That's what this says. What it also says is that if you abstain, like many people do when it comes to minutes, you're suggesting that if the rest of the commission's majority is comfortable with an action, that you support the commission's choice, even though you aren't prepared to make that choice, which is what people often do when they don't attend meetings. They don't vote in favor of minutes because they weren't there, they're uncomfortable doing that. This language suggests exactly that. If you think I'm frustrated, it's because this is a waste of our time, and I would suggest that...
It wasn't the suggestion that council made to me yesterday that it was going to be a waste of your time, so that's why we're doing it. I'm sorry it's a waste of your time, because there are 2 different ways it could be interpreted. That was another way that just came up from Asher.
No, unfortunately, that's not true. Actually, there's one interpretation.
Okay. Why don't you see if there's anything that you'd like to write up for the next meeting, and then we'll just be done with this. Did you have anything?
Well, yeah, I agree in part, and I disagree in part. So on the one hand, I'll abstain because I would prefer that the majority decision go. But frankly, on the last issue, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do because it wasn't totally clear to me what the impact was. So I abstained for that reason. And that's a sad reason and a pathetic reason to abstain. So
it also, but your choice to...
So sometimes, it's very conscious in some, but so I think speaking to abstention is important. And so the reason why what I'm bringing up is relevant is because in the first circumstance, then keeping the language as it is, letting the majority speak for me is fine. But if I'm abstaining for any other reason other than that, then I think it's problematic. And I don't know why.
It's
Commissioner Riggs?
So I'll just say, this first time I'd actually ever read the sentence, and I'll say it's much different, the interpretation is much different than what I thought it was meaning, but I now see what you're saying, Michael. My preference having worked with similar environments before, is that the whatever the abstention is carries with the majority. And that is my preference because it simplifies the process but keeps the symbolic nature of the abstention, which I think is what people are referring to. And so you asked for, I believe, Jonathan, you asked for what we would like. I'll just state very clearly my preference from a simplicity standpoint.
Great. Asher?
I agree with that. I'm just looking at some notes on Robert's rules on abstentions, and it turns out there are two. I agree with that. There are two exceptions. One is there may be things that require an affirmative, for quasi-judicial, that require a majority, an affirmative vote of
The whole body.
the whole body. So that's a special case. And there are the 2/3 cases, which we have to reckon out how those work. But I think it should be pretty simple to put together a map that just shows, in each of these circumstances, here's what the rule changes would produce. And let's just be guided by our intuitions once we look at that map.
Albert?
So just to clarify, Commissioner Riggs, in the 2-1 with 4 abstentions scenario, the 4 abstentions would be siding with the 2.
With the majority, I mean,
That can't happen. An abstention is a decision not to vote. You can't create action with an abstention.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
so it looks like this is split.
First of all,
Wait.
you have to include the language of a majority of the quorum. That creates the need for 4 abstentions, does nothing. Only if there are any more than 3 abstentions and 4 yeses, nothing happens. If there are 4 abstentions and 3 yeses, it's not enough. I really don't think.
Commissioner Gardius, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sure that Albert is going to give us direction. I'm sure that he's going to just look into this tonight. But I just want to talk about this, what Jonathan asked about sentiment. So I raised it in my letter. In general, I propose that we adopt Robert's Rules of Order. And I already talked about this. I think it's clear. I heard that Billy supports it. I hope that you're going to carry over or just continue this perspective. I think that we were violating our own rules, and then adoption of the Robert rules would make meetings only better. That's my perception.
Okay, so.
And then also we got bad press, as you heard from the council women who attended our meeting. Not only in this case, but also in some other cases, we got bad press about how our meetings are conducted, and we should be sensitive to this. We had some complaints from our customers that were who attended our meetings. If you read the press about how the meetings are conducted, and we got complaints from different council members.
When was this that you're referencing?
You just heard Karen Holman just talking to us.
I did, but what are you specifically referencing in terms of the press?
I remember that there was a meeting when
just the basic time frame. Is this a year ago or a week ago?
Yeah, there was some meeting when there was somebody attended our meeting.
It was the rail corridor discussion.
Rail corridor.
Rail corridor meeting. It was the rail corridor meeting?
No, this was, I don't remember which one it was, but nevertheless, there was impolite treatment of that person by one of the parties that were attending the meeting.
Oh, it was the appeal.
Of the restaurant, right?
Of 206 Cal Ave.
Yes, exactly.
Or 260.
But that was last year. We're not talking about the last couple of weeks. All right, so you're going to write up something one way or the other, and then we're just going to have a vote on it next time. Okay? Is there any other issues on any of these points in here? Yeah,
Substitute motions.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just, I sense that I don't believe there's total consensus on the affirmative being, maybe you can write up both ways and we can I don't know, I would just propose, it doesn't sound like there's total consensus on that.
You could just
we can
let it
have
finish first.
two permutations, because I want to make sure I'm respecting Commissioner Alto's.
Yeah, that's fine. You can write it up each way in terms of the impact and have a couple little case studies on how the votes would go. Great, thank you. Yes.
I would like to suggest that if you're going to spend the time doing this, I would very much and sincerely appreciate if you would create a table for how you think whatever you're writing will serve observe the scenarios that you imagine occurring, and then suggest how those scenarios would not be served by this. So if you want to make two rows and 5 or 7 or 20 columns of different outcomes, 421, 137, whatever you want, and show us how this fails to achieve the same result. And if it does, then I think it's worth discussion. But if at the conclusion of the review you find that there isn't any difference, then I don't know that we should spend any time on it. I have a suggestion for another change.
So, yeah, the last, 5 to 8, be sensitive to our agreement. It's substitute motions and amendments, which is not necessarily a slam dunk, just in terms of our prior discussion on this. So we can continue, or we can postpone this till the next meeting. I'd like to just know what people want to do.
Let's go. Let's keep going.
Move on.
How long, I'm sorry?
Do you want to continue or stop?
For how long?
Well, for this last item, substitute motions and amendments.
I feel like this is an item that was attempted to be brought to our attention 2 months ago, and I think
Yeah,
it
I'm just checking with the
takes priority.
commission to see if everybody's happy to keep going.
And so my
All right,
only
all right,
comment,
no.
and because it's not numbered in here, I'll just launch the discussion. I had written it down somewhere, but,
This is on substitute motions and amendments.
right. So if you look at page 3, motions, debates, and voting, the purpose,
1-3?
there's
Or
3 eyes dash 1.
Three,
Do you
one.
guys, I mean, I don't understand. I've raised my hand on this issue. I'd like to begin.
Oh, I didn't see that your hand was open, so I was just
I've
kicking
been
it off.
waiting. If
I was just
we're gonna
kicking it
talk
off.
about how we're not abiding by the procedure, it's like,
I was just teeing it up.
I'm not upset at you, I'm upset at the chair for suggesting that he's gonna follow protocol and then not do it.
Okay, but at the end of the page of V1, it actually, you can relax the rules actually at a retreat, even though we agree not to, so this technically.
You suggested the rules aren't relaxed.
Our meeting starts at 8:15.
Okay. The second to
I'd
last
like to make a
page,
suggestion.
can
I'm
I just-
serious. I would like to.
can you table that for a moment? Or is it pertinent right now?
He wants to talk about substitute motions.
I wanna make my one suggestion.
Yeah, so,
One
That I'm-
suggestion?
that I'm-
I was
Yeah,
launching
I'd like
it
to
to
make
put
my one
something.
suggestion. Are you comfortable with that?
I
Commissioner
am not
Monk is
com-
recognized.
she-
I was
She's
trying to talk
speaking.
about substitute motions.
But okay.
You can speak about it too, but she
Okay,
was
just-
in the middle of talking.
Is it your impression that she was raising her hand or was raising the opportunity to speak about this issue before me?
she was recognized by the chair.
Okay.
Go.
So I was just saying that the purpose of the rules are to facilitate orderly and thorough discussion, and they should not be applied or used to create strategic advantage or unjust results. And it is my personal opinion that the use of substitute motion, the way we've been using it, does create a strategic advantage, and it cuts off debate and discussion. So therefore, I'm in favor of having a meaningful discussion that would move us away from continuing the use of substitute motions. That is my position. And as regards to this meeting tonight, if you do look at the second to last page, this is kind of a combo of an offsite and a retreat. Doesn't look like it really falls into either category based on the agenda.
So could
Michael, would you like to
repeat
speak
your
to
page?
substitute motions?
Sorry?
What point?
3-1.
3-1.
That was your last point of that, correct?
Thank you. Yes.
Michael?
I would like to suggest, I know there is some opposition to this notion. I know I've used substitute motions in the past. I don't believe that means that I can't suggest that they're problematic. I think that someone's past use of a substitute motion shouldn't stop them from considering a change. I would suggest that we make a change, if you're comfortable making it temporary, I would be open to that, a 6-month moratorium on the practice of using substitute motions to derail a debate. One of the challenges that we experienced last year, which I think during my 6 years on this commission, was the first year we really experienced any substitute motion making, was that we would create a motion and the discussion on that motion would linger for a very long time. And that's when we saw Commissioner Walfogel astutely use the call to question, which I think, if we're going to use the right terminology, he means
Previous question.
previous question.
Yeah.
Now that we have this in front of us. And I I believe that the better practice is for us to have a previous question process that allows us to dispense with the motion on the table, giving the maker of the motion and the seconder of that motion sort of the respect to have that motion voted on, and if it fails, then have a second motion. One of the things that I frequently did last year was I seconded most motions so that I could treat friendly amendments as unfriendly in an effort to allow the commission to vote up or down specifics as to best give the staff a sense of where we stood on every little detail. I don't know that that's going to be possible anymore, but I do believe that if we put, just for 6 months, test it out, moratorium on substitute motions, we might see a better process, and I would support that change.
Commissioner Riggs?
Sorry,
I think
it's
so.
okay if you were first before me. It's
Go
fine.
I
ahead.
thought Suma was first, but I don't.
Go ahead.
I'll yield to you and then I'll talk.
Okay. So I'm not in favor of limiting the use of substitute motions. I believe it's a basic part of parliamentary procedure, and it still has to be seconded, and it can still fail. I think sometimes it actually facilitates a meeting to move along quicker, and it's only going to substitute motion is only going to pass if there was support of the majority. With regards to amendments, there are no friendly and unfriendly amendments, in my opinion. There are just amendments that are accepted or not accepted.
We're going to talk about that next, that's right, yeah.
Okay, so I've made both my comments at once.
Well, I agree with the amendment comment. I found this, I just wanted to, my again, this is like, I'm just gonna put my opinion out there.
That's great.
I don't think that, I find substitute motions to be quite a departure from the linearity of Robert's rules. And I totally, I agree with Commissioner Altek and Assistant Director Late. I'm sorry I've been calling you by your first name. That's very disrespectful. And I'm not even sure if I'm not sure I asked the last name right. So. But I will, I would suggest even more strongly that I don't feel, again, I appreciate you feel like it's part of the parliamentary procedure. I just think the procedure can work without that. I think it unnecessarily burdens the process and doesn't give the motion that's being heard the chance of being voted on. And when I worked with this in the past, a motion with the second had to be voted on. When there was a motion on the floor, it had the commission, the job of the chair was to call the vote. When the vote was called, if it failed, then there had to be another motion, and that would be the role of the substitute motion. But I would say I would want to give everyone that brought a motion to the floor, that had a second, that had been discussed, a chance to have their motion voted on before we squashed that motion.
So I just want to clarify your point. So you're saying that
I don't
while you
think
actually
that-
favor parliamentary procedure fully, Robert's rules, you would make an exception for substitute motion?
I've never worked in a scenario using Robert's rules where this idea of a substitute motion existed. An amendment, correct. I honestly, before Commissioner informed me about the tool of substitute motion, I literally never heard of it.
It's a part of the modified.
Albert?
So I guess if I can clarify one issue, Commissioner Suma mentioned, there's no distinction between friendly and unfriendly, or there shouldn't be friendly and unfriendly amendments. From the point of view of the rules, there is no such thing as a friendly amendment. A friendly amendment is, I think, really a suggestion by one of the commissioners to the maker of the motion that the motion be changed. And if the maker and the seconder accept that friendly amendment, in effect what they're doing is withdrawing their motion and making a new motion. The unfriendly amendment is really just an amendment that's being proposed. And I guess I would suggest that it's hard for me conceptually to distinguish between the concept of an unfriendly amendment and the substitute motion, because there seem to be mostly a difference of degree. So a substitute motion is in effect an amendment that suggests we take out all the words from the motion and substitute different words for them, but it is an amendment that requires a second and a vote.
But I mean, I guess what differentiation I would make is the motion maker has a right to accept, the way this is written.
Right, you still get to vote on the motion.
The motion maker has a right to accept the amendment or decline the amendment. And the way this is written with the substitute amendment, if the substitute amendment is seconded, the person that made the original motion is squashed.
Right, so but we're trying to separate these into two things as opposed to just
Well,
one
I think
thing.
that, sorry, if I'm misinterpreting you, trying to combine them back.
Because when we talked in prep for this meeting, we were saying that, you know, amendments make all kinds of sense, right? But every amendment that is accepted by the maker essentially changes the motion, but that's fine. A substitute motion swaps it, so that is a whole different category and is not consistent with, quote, a friendly amendment. So I think we have two issues to discuss here, and we can talk, let's talk about it together now.
I just want to suggest something. I don't think Albert's far from the way that I see it. I would suggest to you that it's true, an amendment could, in theory, completely reverse a motion. But let's take, for example, a situation where you have a motion to approve a parking program, and then the amendment would be, but for 6 months. And a second amendment would be, but let's not approve it. If you vote yes on the amendment, and then yes on the motion, then you have a problem. So I would suggest that in practice, we've never really seen amendments, in my experience, that have completely reversed the motion. We've seen them modify. And the benefit between an amendment, if you want to call it unfriendly or not, let's just say amendment. The benefit of an amendment is that while it can get voted up or down, the motion still gets heard. Whereas if you have a substitute motion, you never vote on the motion. It actually replaces the motion on the floor. And the only scenario where you get to make that motion would be if you re-elevated it at the conclusion of the meeting.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to suggest to simplify that was to essentially get rid of the idea of an unfriendly amendment entirely.
Yeah, I think the idea of an unfriendly amendment is just an amendment, and I think
Which the maker needs to accept.
Right, I think, no, he doesn't.
But what we're suggesting is that that might be a nice change, to say that the maker should accept the amendment. If not, then we have to wait for that one to be voted down.
Okay, so I'm sorry if we're doing this I'll raise my hand just to get, so, I guess what I'm hearing you say is that you want to do away with, when two people make a motion and then a third person wants to amend it, that amendment does, in your mind, need to be seconded?
I think that's the question. I think what Chair Lowling is suggesting is that we do away with amendments that require seconds, and we only keep amendments that are suggestions to the maker.
So what you're really suggesting is that there would be no process for what we typically call an unfriendly amendment, which is that you could have someone make a motion that maybe a majority of the commission feels is not perfect, but that person not be receptive to the change. And so you're essentially requiring, if the maker says, no, I'm not going to accept that, then instead of voting on multiple pieces to better define what it is that we feel, we have to vote on an imperfect motion, potentially deny it, then make a new motion with the amendment included in the language. What I'm suggesting is that when you vote on amendments outside of motions, you allow the commission to suggest, yes, we like this parking program, I'll vote for that, and my first amendment is, but I would like you to focus on a 6-month review process. Maybe the maker doesn't like that idea, but there are a majority of people who do. The representation to the city council is 6 people voted for the parking process, 4 out of the 7 voted for the amendment, so you can understand how it worked. Sometimes when we use substitute motions or amended motions, you have to vote because you don't want to slow down the process, but it's not a vote that reflects your actual opinion. So I would suggest that the change that you're talking about right now is very different from the one I'm suggesting.
It is.
I'm suggesting a process that doesn't get derailed, that allows the maker of a motion to be heard. I would encourage us to make one change at a time, and maybe we can revisit the idea of amendments when we re-review the substitute motion issue 6 months down the road.
Why don't we,
Tim had it, bring it up.
she did?
I had another point about substitute motions.
Okay, what I was gonna suggest is, it's beyond our cutoff date. We
Like-
could consider this sort of the first reading, have him draft something and consider it at another meeting. So,
Is it acceptable to submit something?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dory.
Do you want to close the conversation?
Yeah, but if you've got some last comment to make on that, that's fine.
Oh, I think the benefit of a substitute motion is it may be an idea that has not been expressed before. And so somebody could end up voting for the main motion without having had the benefit of hearing a motion they would have, or alternative they would have preferred if we do, which would have been the substitute motion. So it's also just, I think it's very important for that reason. And
Yeah,
you can't, there isn't.
Another way that can happen is just in the comment about the first motion, just say, this is why I don't approve it, and I want to make a different motion when this gets defeated, so.
Well, I would love that to be the case. My personal experience has been, I say, let's do X, someone says, let's do Y. All discussion on X gets taken off the table, and we just go with Y. So I haven't seen it played out that way. So that's why so this is going to go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen all these cases. I mean, I've seen X proposed, Y proposes substitute, Y fails, going back to X. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, we'll get to the same end point, whether we have amendments, substitute motions. As long as we have amendments, we in effect have the substitute motion process. I can always move to make an amendment to strike out all the previous language and replace it with new language. That's a permissible amendment. And if it receives a second, according to our parliamentary rules, then that prevails. So
You still vote on the motion.
I mean, I don't understand, if it receives a second, but wouldn't the person that made the motion have to be able to accept your?
No, because that's not the amendment rule. So the amendment rule is that anybody can make an amendment, and if that amendment receives a second and a majority vote, then that amendment is attached to the original motion. So under our parliamentary rules, I mean, we always have this as an option. And I think that we're just, unless we're going to make some radical change in how we govern these meetings, and I don't recommend doing that because I think there may be some other complexities we don't understand.
Yeah, Michael?
So look, in the interest of time, I would suggest that I'd like to submit a proposed language to Albert. I can tell you right now, it will basically eliminate the substitute motion process. And I think we should vote on it next time we have the opportunity.
New business item.
And I'm willing to set it for a 6 months timeline, if that would theoretically allow people to feel more comfortable with this experiment.
Yeah, these take a majority vote, we can do it anytime, so that will work fine. So are you moving on from this document entirely? So there's nothing else on this document?
Yeah, so on other,
Right, so
other further ideas, I just had,
yeah, so I want to try to wrap this up because we're almost an hour over. And some of these things we can pick up. The first one is basically stuff that's come up tonight that you've been thinking about. Are there other ideas on how we can define what's going to be successful and evaluate that? And then the second, jump to the third point, evaluation comments on retreat don't have to come in right now. You might want to let that marinate for a while. Asher?
I have a request, which may shorten some meetings, which is we don't seem to have a process for a consent calendar. And sometimes we get things which are really so non-controversial that we don't need to sit through a staff presentation. We could either just vote on them immediately, or we could vote on them through a consent calendar. But I just wonder if there's some topics that are so trivial that we should delegate them to an automatic process. We don't have a process to do that today, as far as I can tell.
Talking about our consent calendar or the council?
Our consent calendar. We don't have a consent calendar.
We don't,
So should we?
Well,
could we?
That's just, I'm sorry just for I mean, just, but by the way, I mean, this is not in regards to our consent calendar, but This could be an interesting proposal, but just knowing how much we all want to chime in, right? I doubt this is going to ever fly, because we like to just look into these items. But in terms of the consent calendar, council consent calendar, this was raised by Arthur, I remember, a couple of years ago, like 3 years ago, and it's accepted by then council in 2015, I think.
Cara Silver.
Cara? I thought it was Arthur.
No.
It wasn't accepted by.
Wasn't accepted by Cara?
So are you commenting on Asher's comment, or?
I was just making, this was also related for just making certain things efficient. But in terms of our consent calendar, could you just give some concrete proposals what it would be? Like, for example, that would you include in the consent calendar the zoning changes that were prepared by the staff recently? Would this be an example of the consent calendar item?
Well, I could imagine a set of non-controversial zoning changes that would just go through a consent calendar process. I don't know whether quasi-judicial could go through a consent calendar or not. Yeah.
You could, but the legislative stuff, you have a public hearing on it. I mean, we can add it. I think the fact of the matter is, and maybe I got that mixed up, but there's 2 or 3 items that go to the commission. I think if there's not something you wanted to spend time on, you can quickly dispense with it. But we can add it into the rules of order as a process.
Well, let's test whether we'd ever use it.
All right, any other ideas that people want to raise? Yeah, go ahead.
2 small things. Page 1, 2 at the little letter B.
You're back on the procedural documents?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just asking in general, not necessarily this, but go ahead.
Are we done?
Yeah, we passed that. We're on to the last 3 bullet points here, but go ahead.
No, that's okay. I'll submit it in writing.
So I had just one correction. It's not a big deal, but the mayor didn't say she wanted all forms of housing. She specifically said housing, and then she said unique types of housing, moderate rate, things like that, and then went into a discussion on the need for senior housing and the wait list for seniors trying to get into affordable housing, just to clarify that. In regards to new ideas, this might not make sense because we're going to get new priorities and we're probably going to do an ad hoc session anyway, but I believe it was Commissioner Gardias who had sent a New York Times article discussing was Oakland or Berkeley, and I just really liked how that article laid out the arguments on both sides of going up and infringing on the light plane and things like that, and just the 2 sides of the arguments. I just thought, it really reflected a lot of the sentiment here, and if we'd be interested in maybe hosting or facilitating like a housing summit to discuss the new laws, the housing crisis, the desire that we want to balance and preserve our single-family neighborhoods, things like that. I don't know if that'd be appropriate form or not, or if people would be interested in that, but I feel like it'd be an opportunity to have some kind of community building and have a proactive presence that the PTC can put out to the community. Would people be interested in having some sort of a housing crisis with that kind of as a guiding discussion point?
Housing summit.
Pardon?
Housing summit.
Like a housing summit, yeah. That's what, does that seem like it'd be? I'm just looking for community building opportunities where we can actually all be in the same room and hear each other's opinions.
Well,
I don't know, staff, have you done anything like that?
I might suggest that there's a lot of stuff happening in the region on this, and it might be more proactive to have the PTC be a host of something that's already and a movement that's already happening. So, because there is, Michael cited a great example that the ULI has invited to have happen and is now taking a life of its own. The Housing Bay, San Francisco Summit. There's nothing to say that we couldn't partner with some of ours.
A lot of these things are put on by like the, one side of the fence or the other. So, we're supposedly an objective, balanced body where,
Well, but that's, hosting 2 sides of the dialogue is the easy thing to do when you're.
So if we talk more about it, is that something that John, Assistant Director Late could do or should do? I think it'd be nice if the PTC had more visibility into the community and had created facilitated discussion on it. Not to add to your workload,
It's not a workload issue. I mean, I
But-
think we heard earlier that the council's going to give us some direction on the housing policy to the extent that the commission fits into, you know, a dialogue about that stuff. I think Commissioner Riggs had a great suggestion that, you know, we can host a forum and invite people to come and speak. And, you know, there's,
that the PTC could host it.
sure.
Do we have buy-in?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I mean, I would suggest that what sounds like you're doing is you're wanting to build local capacity throughout the city, and I think that's the type of thing that would build capacity and interest beyond where it is right now. So I think that would be very positive.
We just have a very divided community, so it'd be nice to hear people's perspectives without speculating. That's kind of my end goal.
Okay, were you done? Any
Great.
other ideas?
Thank you.
Thanks for your perseverance.
I like to think we're less divided than we think.
We're not as far
Yeah,
apart as
I
it
do too.
seems like.
I do too.
Well, that's the whole point. That's kind of the whole point. To have us so much to realize that we're not as far apart as we are, as it looks like. That's my last question.
I better.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yolanda's going to tear everything down. Yolanda will